Coming up on Bloomberg this weekend, American troops injured as a new rebel group enters the war and the S&P slumps.
They have to open it up. They have to open up the Strait of Hormuz.
What the president and the Secretary of State are saying about a timeline.
And no deal on funding for the Department of Homeland Security.
There's chaos at airports throughout the land.
House Republicans revolt, rejecting a bipartisan bill from the Senate.
I spoke to the president a few moments ago. He understands exactly what we're doing and why.
What's next and when TSA agents will get paid.
And Tiger Woods released from jail after a rollover crash and DUI arrest just 2 weeks before the Masters. New questions this morning about his future in golf.
Welcome to Bloomberg This Weekend, live from Bloomberg's World Headquarters in New York. I'm David Gura.
I'm Christina Ruffini. We're here along with Lisa Mateo. It is Saturday, March 28th. And of course, we want to welcome our listeners and viewers across all our Bloomberg platforms, on radio, on TV, on streaming, Bloomberg.com, and the Bloomberg Business app.
We got it all in. We're here Saturday and Sunday, starting at 7 o'clock Wall Street time, with news, analysis, great guests as well, and headlines, of course. And for those, we turn to our one and only Lisa Mateo. Lisa.
You got in the DHS shutdown. It is dragging on after House Republicans reject a funding deal and approve an entirely different plan. Now, the deal they rejected, it was cut by their own Senate GOP counterparts. The new plan, an 8-week measure to temporarily fund the entire Department of Homeland Security. Both chambers of Congress are now out on a 2-week recess. So now there's no end in sight for a shutdown that has hobbled airports across the nation with TSA shortages. President Donald Trump issued an order Friday to use pre-existing funds to pay TSA agents. DHS said they would start seeing paychecks as early as Monday. House Speaker Mike Johnson blaming Democrats earlier yesterday.
The Republicans are not going to be any part of any effort to reopen our borders or to stop immigration enforcement. The Senate Democrats have hoisted upon this appropriations process their radical, crazy agenda. We call it crazy because that's what it is. They want to reopen the borders, and they want to stop the deportation of dangerous criminal illegal aliens.
To the war in Iran, where the Houthis enter the conflict with a missile strike against Israel. The Yemen-based militant group said they would continue operations until strikes on Iran and Hezbollah in Lebanon stop. And now Iran's semi-official Fars news agency reporting that multiple areas in eastern Tehran were struck today. Now, meanwhile, at least 10 U.S. troops have been injured in a missile strike on a Saudi airbase. Now, the AP upping that number to 15. It comes after the U.S. and Israel bombed Iranian nuclear and steel facilities. During his address at the Future Investment Initiative Summit in Miami, President Trump said the U.S. has thousands of Iran targets left.
We're just going after targets. And they have no anti-aircraft, so we're just floating over the top looking for whatever we want. And we're hitting it, and we have another 3,554 targets left. And that'll be done pretty quickly. And then, at some point, we're going to have to determine what we do.
And the latest escalation, it came after President Trump pushed back his deadline for Iran to agree to reopen the Strait of Hormuz or face strikes on power plants. The war roiled market, stocks falling to their lowest level in more than 7 months Friday. Brent crude rose about 4% to end the session above $112 a barrel. Also today, organizers behind the No King protests, they are forecasting their biggest showing, and that's against policies of President Trump. Now, more than 3,000 events, they are planned in cities across the U.S., several more planned abroad, and that includes places in Mexico and Canada as well. So, of course, today, David and Christina will keep you updated as those protests do continue.
Yeah, those are happening later this afternoon, so I'm sure we'll have a lot to talk about when we're back here tomorrow. Thanks, Lisa.
Right now, thousands of U.S. troops making their way toward the Middle East. Secretary of State Marco Rubio is telling reporters this.
I don't care what Iran says. We're going to destroy their factories that make missiles and rockets and drones. We're going to destroy their Navy. We're going to destroy their Air Force. And we are going to significantly destroy their missile launchers so they can never hide behind these things to get a nuclear weapon. We are achieving all those objectives. We are ahead of schedule on most of them. And we can achieve them without any ground troops.
This also comes as at least 10 U.S. soldiers were wounded in an Iranian attack on a Saudi airbase. American officials say the attack also damaged at least 2 aircrafts. And this comes also overnight. We've got reports in the UAE, 6 people being injured when falling debris caused fires in an industrial hub, and a drone attack apparently damaged a radar system at Kuwait International Airport.
I think of all of this in the context of what we just heard from President Trump there at that event in Miami last night, with great specificity talking about these 3,554 targets, dovetailing that with what he said over the course of this week, that the war was nearly finished, that he has a lot of determinism here. And I think that that's what's like in starkest relief for me on this Saturday morning, is a president reckoning with the fact that he may not have as much determinism to end this conflict as he thinks he might. I go back to when he postponed once again that deadline by which Iran would have to come to the table and make a deal.
Right, allowing them some wiggle room.
Allowing them some wiggle room, saying that this effort on his part to attack power plants was effectively paused. And then, of course, we saw Israel attacking a nuclear site yesterday. So it seems like it laid bare the limits of his power to kind of determine where this war is going.
I think it also puts into sight the lack of a clear objective from the beginning from this president, because it's moved, and as that has moved, he's had to move deadlines and operational forces. There's another issue at play here, and that is that the messaging from the White House from the beginning, and actually if you want to talk about it, going back to last summer when the Trump administration struck Iran's nuclear sites and said they had been decimated, degraded, all but obliterated, that messaging has very much changed, saying that the reason for this attack, the reason for this conflict, and the reason the U.S. needed to go in is so that Iran didn't have a nuclear weapon. And the president keeps saying that they have obliterated Iran's military, but that doesn't mean they have obliterated Iran's capability to strike back, as we're seeing yet again overnight. And it is unclear. It was unclear from the beginning how many munitions, missiles, rockets Iran had. That was always a source of contention. That was always something they wanted negotiated alongside a nuclear agreement. But it's clear that they still can bite back and can harm American forces and can harm infrastructure throughout the region and hurt American allies.
You bring up mission and rationale, and Secretary of State Marco Rubio was at this meeting of G7 foreign ministers at the end of last week. He only attended for one day of a several-day-long summit that took place in France. And in his remarks to reporters on the tarmac surrounding that event, he was so adamant that the mission, as he sees it, is clear. You could almost sense his frustration. It felt palpable. He feels like the administration has laid out the rationale here, and listening to him, I don't know if you caught this as well, so much of that focused on the military side of things. There was certainly no talk of regime change from the Secretary of State. It was doing away with the nuclear program. It was dealing with these ballistic missiles. All well and good at this moment in time, but I think to what you were just saying, this has expanded and widened so much now that seems almost quaint in the context of how big this war has gotten.
And part of that lack of regime change talk might be given the lack of desire for that in Europe, especially since he was coming off what appears to be reportedly a contentious G7, where he had a run-in with Kaja Kallas at the EU, according to Axios, who basically said, you know, you keep saying you're going to talk tough about Russia. When are you going to make it happen? And there's also issues now about how the conflict in Iran is going to impact the conflict in Ukraine, both with bandwidth and money and resources. But things like money that has been earmarked for Ukraine, one of the issues that was brought up at the G7 is leaders from Germany to the EU to the Baltics saying we want to make sure that this money and these funds and these munitions that have been earmarked for Ukraine, who also very much needs these interceptors, which are running low across the world, don't get diverted to the Middle East. And the response from the U.S. is, well, we don't think that will happen, but it will not happen. And that's royal of the few allies.
Yes,
and
the Secretary
friends.
of State weighing in on that as well. And we're going to dig into that more with Ambassador Bill Taylor, the former U.S. Ambassador to Ukraine, in just a few minutes here on the show. But before we get there, I want to bring in Bloomberg's Deputy UAE Bureau Chief Abir Abu Omar, along with Bloomberg U.S. Equities reporter Natalia Kinizevich, who's in Miami. She was there for the president's speech yesterday. Abir, let me start with you and just get your perspective on how, again, we've talked about how this war has widened. What's happened over the last 24 hours here? We've seen the agitation across the Gulf as this war has continued, some doubt about the course of it and what the U.S.'s role is going to be going forward here. Just get us up to speed on what's been going on here over the last 24 hours.
Yeah, good morning, David. So, mentioning the word widened is correct here. Just this morning, the Houthis, which are the last sort of the remaining axis of resistance, as Iran calls them, those are its proxies in the region, which include Hezbollah and Hamas as well, that hasn't joined the war before. So now it is taken an active part in it, attacking Israel, saying that it will continue those attacks unless the strikes against Iran stop. Now, this again widens the parameters of this conflict in the region. The Houthis are obviously not as capable as Iran. They're backed by Iran, but they have proven to have caused chaos in the region before. 2022 is the year I'm brought back to when they attacked Abu Dhabi. killing some people. They have also launched attacks on Saudi previously, the Saudi Aramco facility, also in the early 20s, causing major halts in production there. So the Houthis entering this conflict is widening the parameters of this war, but also what we're seeing is they're saying on Telegram that they haven't said yet that they're going to attack any of the Red Sea tankers, but they've done so in the past. And so if they do that again, this time around, this causes possibly yet another headache for oil prices because, as you know, Saudi Arabia has diverted some of its exports through the Red Sea. That is a new sort of horizon that it's opened up since the Strait of Hormuz has been effectively closed over the past month or so. And so if the Houthis go on and attack tankers in the Red Sea, that causes, yet another, as I mentioned, headache for oil prices. Will we see Brent go above 112 if that happens? Possibly. But the attacks into the Gulf and across Iran from Israel have been continuing, with attacks across the United Arab Emirates, Kuwait, and even Oman, which has been a mediator, as you know, before all of this started.
Abir, do we know what the impetus was for the Houthis, who, as you said, had kind of been on the sidelines up until now? Why get in now, and what capabilities do they have? Because, of course, they've been involved in this very long, protracted war in Yemen. How much damage can they do, and for how long?
Yeah, absolutely. And not just the war in Yemen, right? They were also part of the war between Hamas and Israel in 2023, post-October 7th. And so what we know is that the regime in total, including its axis of resistance, including Hezbollah in Lebanon, has been significantly weakened. But as you guys have mentioned earlier in the show, despite being significantly weakened, this regime and its proxies has been able to counter those U.S. strikes and those U.S.-Israeli attacks that have been going on since late February. And so we don't know what exactly the capabilities that the Houthis have as of now, or just how much remaining of those capabilities they have. But we know that they have been able to attack. We know that they've promised or vouched that they will continue those attacks unless Israel and the U.S. stop. And so that is something that we'll continue to monitor over the next couple of weeks. But look, the President Trump's deadline for the negotiations is coming up on April 6th. This is the extended deadline that he has given Iran, but effectively Iran has rejected this 15-point proposal that effectively or essentially means that the U.S. would ask Iran to dismantle their nuclear program in return for some sanctions relief. We continue to wait and see what happens by the beginning of next week, but it looks like this conflict is not ending anytime soon.
April 6th, 8 p.m., that's what the president said, East Coast time. That's 3:30 a.m. Tehran time. Natalia, I want to get your perspective on what the president had to say. You were in the room for that speech at that conference that was arranged by the Saudi Private Investment Fund. Let me ask you first, though, just about how, yes, this war has widened geographically. We've seen the fallout through markets widen as well. And yesterday was a very crystalline example of that. We see the Nasdaq 100 now in correction territory, the Dow following suit, Brent over $110 a barrel. It does seem like there is increasing market agita, investors beginning to think more and more about this duration variable, which has been so amorphous and seemingly not cheered by what the president has said about how long this war is going to last, and indeed the constancy here with which he has moved this deadline back.
Right. So it is interesting because Donald Trump, in addition, of course, to all thoughts about Iran, and he was criticizing some European leaders for not supporting him, but he did talk a little bit about the stock market. Of course, he was talking a lot about how U.S. indexes reached multiple records last year. What stood out to me, he said that he thought that we would see bigger drop in stocks. He said that he expected oil prices would go higher. I don't know what to make of this statement. So maybe we are still far from from high prices in the energy space. But he did not say anything, of course, about the steep losses and in anxiety that we do see across investors right now. He, of course, said that when the war ends, the U.S. stock market would be, quote, a rocket ship. And, of course, he encouraged investors to keep investing in the United States. So overall, he was pretty bullish on the U.S. stock market and the U.S. economy.
We have some sound of the president from that meeting where he talks about the Strait and how he's going to approach that. We're going to have you guys listen to that now.
There are 8 ships of oil coming out of Iran And then they actually said, we're going to add an extra 2. And they added an extra 2, so we had 10 ships. And then people realized we were actually negotiating. And we're negotiating now, and it'd be great if we could do something, but they have to open it up. They have to open up the Strait of Hormuz.
So, Abir, I don't know what the appetite is in the region to rename it the Strait of Trump. Strait of Trump. Okay. We got the Gulf of Mexico, Gulf of America, Strait of Trump. Nomenclature aside, we spoke, and we're going to speak later in the show with Arsenio Dominguez, who is the Secretary General for the UN of International Maritime Organizations, talking about the complications of trying to free up traffic in that strait. Do we have any updates on those negotiations and the flow of traffic, and if any of those regional allies are making any progress, either negotiating with Iran or with the U.S. for escorts for those ships through the strait?
So that's a very important question, right? Because these countries, the 6 countries that make up the GCC, Iran's neighbors that are literally a ferry ride away from the ports of Iran, are quite frustrated as of now with both Iran's attacks, but also with the U.S. administration, because according to our own reporting, what they say is that they don't want the Trump administration to reach a deal with Iran that doesn't promise long-term or sustainable lack of further attacks on the region. Now, Christina, look, this is the first time that Iran has ever directly attacked those countries. And so you've got the biggest two, Saudi Arabia and the United Arab Emirates, that voiced secretly their frustration against the United States, saying that possibly that reliability aspect of the security guarantees that the U.S. has historically provided, the air bases that exist in the region, are something that is falling into question right now. And this is also something that I have spoken to with a lot of UAE officials back when the 12-day war was happening last year, where they said they're afraid of Iran crossing those red lines, and that puts the relationship with the United States in question. Now, they're not going to come out and verbatim say that they're frustrated with the United States, but that is something that they discuss secretly again. And when it comes to oil and negotiations, we know that a lot of countries, including the UAE, have diverted traffic through the port of Fujairah, which is 80 miles away from Iran.
Abir, thank you very much. Thanks, Natalia, as well. We'll catch up with you a little bit later in the show. Christina, during that speech last night, the president also talking about Cuba in this kind of funny way of making an allowance where he said Cuba's next, but media don't report that. So at this moment in which the president is dealing with the ramifications of this widening war, still making waves talking about Cuba as well.
I mean, you have to think that's a very important issue for his Secretary of State, Marco Rubio, who is wearing many hats. Don't forget, he's still the NSC director. But yes, it's a lot going on, and we're going to talk about it coming up here. But first, a House and Senate divided over funding for the Department of Homeland Security. It's now the longest partial government shutdown in history. We're going to talk to a TSA agent who's gone without pay for weeks. That's straight ahead on Bloomberg this weekend.
Thank you for joining us live on Bloomberg this weekend. I'm Lisa Mateo. Let's get you up to date with some of the top stories. And Secretary of State Marco Rubio says the war in Iran will take weeks, not months.
We're going to destroy Iran's Navy. We've destroyed their Air Force. We are going to basically destroy their ability to make missiles and drones in their factories. And we're going to substantially, and I mean dramatically, reduce the number of missile launchers so that they cannot hide behind these things to build a nuclear weapon and threaten the world. As the Department of War has consistently outlined, we are on or ahead of schedule in that operation and expect to conclude it at the appropriate time here in a matter of weeks, not months.
Now, Rubio, he was speaking outside of a G7 gathering in France yesterday. Now, he also didn't rule out diverting weapons that were meant for Ukraine to instead support the war against Iran. Now, meanwhile, President Trump, he is promising some relief for farmers that have been impacted by the war in Iran, but also tariffs and other challenges.
I'm also asking Congress to quickly pass the new farm bill. And today I'm promising to request additional farm relief for our great patriots in the next funding bill. So we have you taken care of in both instances, and we're pushing very hard for the new farm bill.
The president speaking outside the White House yesterday. Now, Trump said the loan guarantees, they would cover farmers and food suppliers, including vegetable, grain, seed farmers, cattle, pig, and poultry producers, as well as grocery wholesalers and others. And in other news, a pro-Iran hacking group, it claimed to breach FBI Director Kash Patel's personal email inbox, and it posted some of the contents online. Now, the emails include travel details, correspondence with leasing agents, and global entry and loyalty account numbers. The FBI said the information is historical in nature and says it involves no government information. David and Christina.
All right, Lisa, thank you very much. Appreciate that update. The two chambers of Congress at an impasse over how to fund the Department of Homeland Security. That's after a series, 2 late-night votes. No clear solution. Both the House and the Senate are now on Easter recess.
President Trump signed a memo to pay TSA workers who have worked without pay for weeks now, of course, leading to those sprawling lines that you've seen at U.S. airports. Joining us now from Washington, we have Bloomberg News congressional reporter Eric Wasson. Eric, I appreciate you getting up. I saw you sending notes very late last night. We did offer to send you coffee, but you told us shockingly and very impressively that you've never used DoorDash or Uber Eats. I wanted to focus on that before we get to Congress, because it's so lovely.
Luddite. As you can see behind me, I print books, so we make our own breakfast here.
All right.
I do appreciate the offer, guys.
All right, we're very grateful nonetheless. Can you walk us through where everything is at? The Senate passed a version of this with an ICE carve-out. It went to the House, and then it went nowhere. The House has done something that's DOA in the Senate. Just please update us on what's going on between the two chambers.
It's an extraordinary breach between House and Senate Republicans. John Thune crafted this bill middle of the night, basically funding the full Department of Homeland Security for the rest of the fiscal year till October, except for Border Patrol and ICE and immigration enforcement activities. That passed unanimously on a voice vote. As soon as it got to the House, it was promptly rejected by the House Freedom Caucus. And Speaker Mike Johnson, who's always, trying to shore up support with different parts of his conference, went along with that Freedom Caucus demand to reject the Senate bill. Instead, they passed an 8-week continuing resolution for the whole department, but that again funds ICE without any new reforms that Democrats have demanded. And Chuck Schumer said that's DOA. So the standoff continues. Importantly, Trump has signed this memo paying TSA agents as soon as Monday. So that should alleviate the lines. But it's important to point out there are other members of the department, whether you're a Secret Service worker, human trafficking, people in the secretary's office, people who are doing communications. There are a lot of people who are not going to get paid, continue to not get paid. It's going to become a difficult thing. This is over 40 days now, and they're going to be held hostage. I don't see the Senate and House coming back during this 2-week recess. I don't really see a solution anytime soon. The main thing they're going to try to do is this budget reconciliation bill and a massive package similar to the Trump tax bill, where they did put some immigration enforcement money, but they need all Republicans to unite. Everyone wants to throw their things in. I talked to a member of the New York delegation who wants the SALT deduction of all things extended again. So this is going to become a massive food fight, and these workers are going to be held hostage. Now, the president could try an extraordinary measure to try to potentially illegally pay those other DHS workers from this fund for border security, but I don't see a solution anytime soon that's really permanent.
You bring up the president, and I want to play a little bit of sound here of the president in Miami last night, speaking at that FII conference, addressing what's transpired here and also his relationship with the leadership in the Congress. Let's take a listen.
I understand John Thune and I understand Mike Johnson. They want to be sure that people aren't coming into our country like they have for the last 4 years. I don't want to say they've ruined it. They made my job a lot harder.
They've made my job a lot harder. The president there on the tarmac traveling to that conference. Eric Wasson, talk a bit about the president's engagement, not with this memo, finding a way to pay these TSA workers, but with this issue more broadly, and what that says about, even more broadly than that, the way that he's been interacting with this Congress and with congressional leadership.
I thought it was an extraordinary comment because it's almost like Trump was playing peacemaker between feuding, House and Senate Republican leaders, which I'm sure a role that he would enjoy. He is still questing after that Nobel Peace Prize, after all. But he's trying to, I think, in that case, smooth over differences. It's extraordinary that Speaker Johnson called what Thune did a joke, a ridiculousness. We asked him about it. He tried to sort of sidestep it and say that was Chuck Schumer who really engineered this. But we're trying to see what kind of long-term consequences of this rift will be. Can they do this new tax and spending bill? Are they able to unite in a midterm message? Certainly the tension between the two chambers is extraordinary. But the immigration issue was historically one of Trump's strong suits. I think the American public generally wants stronger borders. But then what happened in Minnesota with the ICE enforcement, the sort of chaos and the practices sort of weakened his popularity on that, gave Democrats an opening to demand these changes. That was very interesting last night. There was a small press conference, barely attended by media, of Brian Fitzpatrick and Tom Suozzi, two members of the Problem Solvers Caucus, and they have a very intriguing idea to sort of pass some of these reforms. A Congress that's more open to compromise would probably embrace something like that. But it's such a long shot. They're even talking about a discharge petition, a really long shot petition to try to get this done. But Congress is nowhere near grappling with this. But I think if the public were to be consulted, they would want to see some kind of changes to ICE behavior, maybe not having masked agents, be able to go willy-nilly into people's homes.
Eric Wasson, thank you very much. Again, appreciate you joining us here on this Saturday morning early.
And it is a truly excellent bookshelf. All right, we want to bring in Jill DeJanovich. She's a TSA worker in Las Vegas and the Nevada Union representative. Jill, first of all, I just want to check in on you. How are you doing? I know you've got kids. I can't imagine how tough this has been, missing a paycheck. Just bring us up to date about how you're doing and what your frustrations are.
Well, yeah, definitely very, very frustrated. We are incredibly thankful that Trump did put out the executive order that we're supposedly start to be paid on Monday. We're supposed to get our back pay only, nothing continuing on. So while we are thankful and we're grateful that we will supposedly be getting that, it's really just a temporary Band-Aid because we're not going to be paid from here on out. It's just our back pay. So essentially, we're just resetting the clock.
What has the conversation been like among you and your colleagues as all of this has unfolded? We've seen the numbers of those who have left, decided to quit, or haven't gone to work because they haven't been getting paychecks. What have you been talking about with your colleagues about how this has gone and what it says just about the state of the government, the state of the agency?
It's frustrating because this is the third time that this has happened in 5 months. And because it keeps happening, we're just wondering what that means for the future of our agency. Privatization has been thrown out there a lot. It's been being talked about a lot more. And the fact that they're so easily able to shut us down, we are frankly just worried about our jobs in the future.
Is there any concern about this impacting the safety of the flying public? I know that the workers who are on the job are doing their absolute best, but about 40% of workers have called in sick across the country, according to the AP. There's about 500 TSA workers who reportedly have quit due to lack of payment and frustration. At some point, is this going to start impacting safety, or are we there already?
No, I don't think safety is going to be affected because we still do have our very dedicated officers that are on the job serving the public. However, those lines will continue to go up the more that we lose officers and the more that people call out. So it'll just take a lot longer and people will end up missing their flights more because of it.
Jill, what's it been like having ICE agents deployed in the airports? I think when that was first announced, something that we were talking about on the show is what would that look like? Would they be doing some of the work that you and your colleagues do? Are they working alongside you or with you? Just on a very granular level, what has it been like having them in the airports?
Well, we haven't actually had them deployed in Las Vegas because our lines haven't been that long. However, because they aren't trained to do our jobs, I don't know how much help they would actually be. Essentially, they would be delegated to roles serving out in the queue, moving traffic, pushing it around, helping passengers divest items from their bags. Essentially, I don't know how helpful that would be to us because, again, they aren't trained to do our jobs like we are. So they aren't properly able to help passengers divest items from their bags, thus leading to more bag checks on our end while we are actually screening that luggage.
And that's kind of what we're seeing for our audio listeners is ICE agents. They are in the airport, but even in the video we're watching right now, they're mostly ushering traffic through those, I don't know what they're called, those like Disney World style rope lines that we all have to go through so much of our lives. I also want to ask you, tell us how long you've been with TSA. And look, it's a tough job. People at airports are cranky. I always try to be nice. Not everyone tries
I'm
to.
Sure.
David Gura, I can be nice, just not to you. I love my TSA agents and I'm nice to you. But it's a tough job. It takes skill and it takes patience and it has to be stressful. And I would imagine adding this kind of stress and uncertainty to a job that people probably went to looking for security and sustainability in their lives has to undercut the desire to do this job and for recruitment. Do you have any concerns long term about people wanting to be or stay TSA agents?
Definitely. I have been with TSA for almost 3 years now. And so this is my first real experience going through this. It is just like we are living in a twilight zone right now. It is crazy to me that this is happening. I did not expect that this would happen when I initially signed on to federal service 3 years ago. I believed that this would be a nice, safe, secure career job for me. I thought it was a great opportunity. With recruitment, I believe that people will be coming in and they will be cognizant of the fact that, yes, this is an agency that can be shut down very easily. And so I don't know that we would get the highest quality of people that we normally would have because of that.
Jill, I want to ask you where all of this is headed. You brought up the specter of privatization a moment ago, and I've noticed, I'm sure you have, editorials in newspapers, articles being written about how at some airports that do have private security, there haven't been these lines. There's an effort here to make it seem like that might be the solution going forward. I'm very curious sort of how worried that makes you, and you being a representative of your union, sort of what you're doing to make the case that that should not be the route that this country goes down.
With privatization, that is going to be a for-profit model. I don't believe that aviation security should ever be a for-profit model. The beauty of it being a federal program is that you're not there to make money. You're there to screen passengers, ensure the highest levels of security. That is my biggest fear with going private, that these private screening companies would come in and they would cut costs wherever they can, whether that be with training, whether that be with background checks, whether that would be with hiring and implementing new equipment and programs. So that is my biggest concern with that, is that they would be here to make money rather than to actually do the job that we're here to put forth, which is to screen passengers and luggage and keep America safe.
All right, Jill DeJanovich, thank you so much for joining us, and I promise I will be very nice if I ever see you in Vegas. We really appreciate you.
I will say that it's funny, the lines haven't been that long at some airports. They have at others. In New York, I think it was like 4.5 hours, and just getting a grip on that throughout all of this has been really difficult.
And it's unpredictable too. I think people are also getting to the airports earlier, which, they have usual peak times they may not be used to because people are panicking. It's always, my friend just went through JFK and it was 90 minutes, which isn't great, but not terrible. Yeah. It's workable. It's workable.
Coming up here, Ukrainian President Zelensky pledging his country's help to the Middle East in the war on Iran. Next, we'll speak with Bill Taylor, former U.S. ambassador to Ukraine. He's going to join us next, right here on Bloomberg This Weekend, on Bloomberg Television, Bloomberg Radio, at Bloomberg.com, and of course, on the Bloomberg Business app. Much more coming up.
Thank you for joining us live on Bloomberg This Weekend. I'm Lisa Mateo. Let's get you up to date with some of the top stories and the 4 astronauts that are involved in NASA's Artemis II mission. Well, they have arrived in Florida ahead of their planned launch. These are the astronauts, Reed Weissman, Victor Glover, and Christina Koch, along with Canadian astronaut Jeremy Hansen. They were at the Kennedy Space Center in Cape Canaveral yesterday. Now, the group, they will climb inside NASA's Orion crew capsule on April 1st and rocket off to the Earth, starting a 10-day journey around the moon. Now, the crew will break records for the farthest humans have flown into deep space. Well, Tiger Woods released on bail after being arrested on suspicion of DUI. Now, authorities say Woods' Land Rover clipped a truck and rolled onto its side yesterday afternoon in Jupiter Island, Florida. A breath test showed no alcohol in his system. Investigators believe that his impairment was due to medication or drugs. Now, Woods was previously involved in a car crash in 2021 that left him with serious injuries. To March Madness now, where St. John's gave it their all, but in the end, they lost to Duke 75-80. Duke now heads to the Elite Eight along with UConn, Michigan, and Tennessee. And in case you guys are watching today, we have Iowa taking on Illinois and Purdue challenging Arizona. So get ready for it because I'll bring it to you tomorrow.
Painful for me. I'm not a St. John's fan, but I am a UNC fan. So anytime Duke is imperiled, it's good for me. But it was a very tight game until the end.
It was.
I also want to say I'm very excited about the astronaut whose name is Christina. She's clearly the superior Christina, but I'm going to be tracking this and living vicariously through her. Since I didn't get to go to space camp.
Did you want to go to space camp?
Absolutely want to go to space camp.
In Alabama?
I had to go to ballet camp instead.
Oh, well.
Anyway.
It's a trade-off.
I'm not upset about it. All right, back to the news. Thanks, Lisa. All right, on Friday, G7 allies expressed concern that the war in Iran is drawing the U.S. attention and some commitments away from Russia's war with Ukraine, amid reports that the U.S. is considering diverting weapons earmarked for Kyiv to the Mideast instead. Now, U.S. Secretary of State Marco Rubio addressed those rumors after the meeting.
Well, it hasn't happened yet. Nothing yet has been diverted, but it could. I mean, frankly, it's not diverted. These are not diverted weapons. These are our weapons. These are sales. These are military sales through Pearl, paid for by NATO. And so the question at some point is, if we have a need, let me be clear. If the United States has a military need, whether it is to replenish our stocks or to fulfill some mission in the national interest of the United States, we're always going to come first.
Joining us now is the former U.S. Ambassador to the Ukraine, William Taylor. Lucky to have him with us today to get his perspective. Ambassador, let me ask you, first of all, a broad question, which is how this widening war in the Middle East has sort of colored or changed strategy and the trajectory of that war in Ukraine. What have you been watching for, and what's worrying you at this point in time as so much attention is diverted to the Middle East?
Well, David, you're exactly right. There is a big change. One of the big changes is the pressure, the financial pressure on Russia has been reduced. The oil price has gone up, so every barrel that the Russians sell on the world market gets them more money. And that was there was big progress. There had been big progress in squeezing the Russian economy and the Russian treasury by reducing the amount of oil sold. And that has been changed. We've relaxed sanctions on Russia, allowed them to sell more, and every barrel, as I say, gets a higher price. So that's a big problem. On the other hand, David, the people in the Middle East and the nations in the Middle East are very interested in the Ukrainian experience in shooting down Iranian drones. And so we got President Zelensky there talking to the leaders, making it very clear which side Ukraine's on, and it's also very clear which side Russia is on.
There's also a report in Axios this morning that there were some tense moments between the EU foreign policy chief Kaja Kallas and Marco Rubio at that meeting, in which Kallas essentially said, you said at a forum a year ago you were going to get tough on Russia if they hampered U.S. efforts to stop the war. That hasn't happened. And Rubio reportedly shot back, basically, if you think you can do it better, we're going to step aside. Now, I did reach out to some sources who were at that meeting. They were unable to confirm this exchange, but it does seem like there are tensions there about the U.S. not pressuring Russia in the way that we have seen America pressure other strongmen in other countries, including Venezuela and Iran. Do you think there's anything Europe can do at this point to change that policy from the U.S.?
Well, yes, Christina. The Europeans are stepping up. They recognize that the American attention is diverted to Iran. And Europeans recognize the real threat that Russia poses to them. And all of the effort that had gone into squeezing Russia, putting sanctions on Russia, all of that is at least reduced at this point. And so the Europeans know they have to step up. They can do some things. They can continue what they've started, which is to put pressure on this shadow fleet, these old oil tankers that are moving the sanctioned oil around the world, and the Europeans have started to board these tankers, and that reduces the ability of the Russians to sell oil. And the Europeans are also stepping up in their support for Ukraine, and they can continue to do that.
You've brought up these sanctions that have been relaxed by the administration, and I do want to get your perspective on that. We've heard explanation after explanation from the Treasury Secretary, from Scott Bessent, as to why this is happening. I'm curious how that's ringing to you, if any of that makes sense, if there's a justification here that makes sense to you, if you can understand in any way why this is happening at this point in the war.
David, it looks like the administration is trying to find ways to put more oil on the market, so to put downward pressure on prices. They're very concerned about the very high price of oil. As I say, the high price of oil is helping the Russians, but it is also having a negative effect on the world economy. So the administration is looking for any way they can put more barrels of oil on the market. One way to do that is to allow people to buy Russian oil and to buy Venezuelan oil and even to buy Iranian oil. So they're doing this in order to try to put downward pressure. It's obviously not helping, and it is having a bad effect, a negative effect on the pressure that we need to put on Russia to stop this war in Ukraine.
Before we let you go, I want to ask you about the status of NATO, because we heard President Trump growingly frustrated with European allies, he says, not stepping up enough to secure the Gulf. NATO allies are frustrated about Trump not stepping up to help with the war in Ukraine. What is the status of that alliance, and are you concerned that it could fall apart?
Well, Christina, NATO's gone through some difficult times before and has made it through. This time, however, it does appear that there's a serious movement toward a European pillar a European pillar in NATO. So NATO would be comprised of a European pillar that Europeans have capabilities and have their own nuclear weapons with the British and the French, have their own defense industrial base. To be a European pillar within NATO. Then the other pillar, of course, is the U.S. pillar. And in the best case, that's a stronger NATO. But you're right to point out there are tensions between the Europeans and the Americans at this point. And the question is how to move forward. One way to do that is for the Europeans to develop their own capabilities, I would say within the context of NATO, and make it a stronger alliance.
Ambassador Bill Taylor, thank you very much for the time on this Saturday. Really appreciate it.
Nice to see you again, sir. Thank you for joining us.
William Taylor joining us here on Bloomberg This Weekend. And Christina, I was struck by this piece in the FT over the course of the week about Mark Rutte and the way that he has pursued this strategy with Donald Trump. Daddy Trump, as he said, the daddy strategy, I think is how Ed Luce put it in that opinion piece. But really a very tricky moment for NATO when you have the Secretary General kind of comporting himself to the whims or wills of one member of NATO, that's the United States, but really you see Europe, the rest of these nations, the rest of these allies coalescing around something else entirely. How do you have an alliance like that when one party is so outbalanced?
Right, and NATO was set up in its day to keep Russia out, Germany down, and the U.S. in. And I think when you look at that writing principle, it's adapted and evolved over the years, but does it really stand? Especially now, as you have, I was reading this morning, Germany has 1,200 troops in Lithuania. This is the first since World War II, because these European allies are looking for other people to help defend themselves against Russia, because the U.S. is not always a reliable partner in that theater anymore.
And you talk about that adaptation, that evolution, certainly over the course of the last 4, now going to 5 weeks of this war, we've seen an evolution in the way that the president has talked about allies. He has criticized them, then made an entreaty for them to join the U.S. in trying to protect the Strait. Then he's criticized them once again. So I think that, and we saw that certainly in France at this G7 Foreign Ministers Summit, there's an overarching level of confusion, I think, among many of these allies, about what the U.S. is doing, maybe more clarity about what their role should be going forward. You're pretty adamant that they're not going to get involved in this war, but might get involved after the missiles stop flying. It's
also whiplash, because the difference between the two administrations was really shocking. Biden was vehemently pro-NATO, and there are strands in in President Trump's cabinet that are also pro-NATO. But the president himself has always been a bit skeptical of that alliance.
Yes.
All right, coming up on Bloomberg This Weekend, we got BT Dubs with Lisa Mateo. And you can explore live streaming news and interviews, all our Bloomberg TV shows, documentaries, reports, analysis, and more, all in one place. Check it out on Bloomberg.com/videos. We'll be right back. Welcome back to Bloomberg This Weekend. We're now going to talk to our bestie, Lisa Mateo, who has some of the most read stories, or some of the stories you might have missed over the weekend. Lisa, what you got for us?
All right, so we've been talking about the airport so much, right? So we found this story. This one's in the Washington Post. It says, when your first class flight turns out to be a bus ride. Okay, so let me explain. Here, imagine the scenario, right? You check in for your flight. You thought it was a flight. You went through TSA. You go up to the gate, right? And on the other side of the gate is this American Airlines bus that's loading luggage onto it. So you think you're going to a plane, right? The bus is taking you to a plane, but no, it starts to roll down the tarmac out into the highway, and you're sitting on the bus going, where am I going? It's happening to a lot of people, okay? The reason why, let me get behind it, it's the Landmark Company. So they operate these bus routes, right? For airlines that used to have the smaller commuter, you know, like when you take those hopper planes, you know, the smaller ones. So they don't have them as much anymore. So now they've joined with this company. So people are going online, but they're not reading the small print that actually says it's a bus.
The rage I would feel if I thought I was getting on a plane and the bus just kept going. Oh man.
That's a distressing phenomenon. You're paying for a flight. You're not paying for like a Greyhound ticket, which I imagine is
correct, but you
magnitude smaller.
You were paying for it because it said bus, but you just weren't as observant to the small print that actually said it was a luxury bus. Do you read the fine print?
Yes and no.
Yes and no.
I wouldn't think to look for you're actually taking a bus. I will say, though, as annoying as this is, like I used to live in Colorado Springs and the big airport was Denver, and it was always trying to get there was a pain. Like if it means you're already through security and you don't have to go through security at the bigger airport and it's all taken care of logistically, maybe that's better.
Have they built that train yet? Colorado Springs to Denver?
No.
Is that a roiling issue still?
I don't think.
3 decades after I lived in Colorado?
I think a bus is your best bet. Okay. But I, to be honest, I have not checked on the train. Okay. But I don't know. Would you be mad if you got on a bus?
I would be. Although, I don't know. I hate those small planes.
I know. It makes me a little bit scared. But they say it's comfort. It's a luxury bus. Hey,
all right.
You know,
I think
they say they're comfortable.
that's a contradiction.
It's a widely
in terms,
applied
but okay.
adjective.
All right.
Yes. What else you got, Lisa? What else?
Okay, we'll stick with travel. Okay, so
Okay.
we'll go with cruises. Okay, now if you haven't been on a cruise lately, I wonder if you've noticed that there's
I have not,
younger
by the way.
people.
Or ever, yes.
There's a lot more younger
Okay.
people. So this one is on Bloomberg. It says cruise influencers make $350,000 a year by luring Gen Z to ships. So basically, these influencers earning big money. They're partnering with like Royal Caribbean or Virgin Voyages to highlight their travels, and then they attract that younger audience. Bloomberg Originals actually did a little documentary on this. Take a listen.
The cruise industry and content creators have really cultivated a symbiotic relationship in this post-pandemic world. The message that cruise companies are trying to get out there with these content creator partnerships is really that cruising is for everyone, with a special emphasis on younger people who might not have thought of cruising as a viable or attractive option in the past.
See, so millennials, Gen Z, more of them. I have to say, my son booked his own cruise with his girlfriend because they saw it on social media. They're like, wow, everyone's going to
early
these.
20s?
He's
late
23.
Yeah.
I was like, maybe you should pay rent if you can
Yeah, there
afford
you
a
go.
cruise.
Well,
This could be a side hustle for you, Christina.
But
You
it's
could.
influencers are making $350,000.
That's a lot of money. You'd have to go on a cruise.
Traveling
though.
the world.
I am not a cruise human. However, for $350,000,
You might
I
do it.
could become a cruise human. I mean,
a cruise human.
I've never been on one. Have you?
I have not, but I'm thinking about it. I'm hesitant. I don't
You're
know. It seems
hesitant.
like a big mall. Crowded.
does.
I
It's
don't
very
know.
busy.
I will say, I've heard that if you have young kids, I mean, I've been shocked at the people who seem like very anti-cruise people who have taken their children on like Disney cruises and loved it just because their kids are so happy and they get some time.
Yes.
If you have intergenerational families and you've got old people and kids, you need everybody to do something. I've heard they're really good, but it's...
I want to
there's
just
something
film
for
this.
everyone.
It seems like you're doing some cruise.
I'm trying
Cruise
out.
influencing.
You need some cruise
right now.
influencing. Please let me know.
Intergenerational families. Hashtag.
Did you buy it?
For the
Was that
win.
inspiring? Okay.
Give her
Oh, yeah.
a follow, guys.
You got more?
Yes, let's take it
Sorry.
to sports, okay? So
Okay.
this one's from The Athletic, Christina's favorite, okay?
Yes.
So on Netflix opening night,
I watched
fans
it.
just wanted to watch the show. Okay, so there's some controversy
Okay.
behind this.
Wait,
So
what
the
is this?
opening day, this was the Yankees versus San Francisco Giants, okay? It was opening day for MLB baseball.
You got it.
Spit it out. And the Yankees won, just want to put it out there.
Yes, they did.
But it was on Netflix exclusively.
Okay.
So for example, we're sitting at home trying to figure out where the game is. We're on cable because we have cable flipping through, and some people couldn't find it. It was exclusive to Netflix.
Did you get it? You
I did
subscribed
get it,
last
so I
minute.
watched. The stream was successful.
It
There were
looked
no
beautiful.
issues.
I
It
must say,
looked
San
great.
Francisco has never looked prettier.
How would you
Yes.
know to like go look for the game on Netflix?
You
Like,
Google it and you say, where is the Yankees game tonight? That's what we did, and we found it. But they said it was like a show, like there were dancers on taxi
It was amazing. They
cabs
came
for
out
the
of taxi
Yankees.
cabs, and there was the cable car
the
for the
cable cars
Giants.
for the Giants. But it was 20 minutes late.
Yeah.
The game was late
Tom
because
Keane
of this
was
whole
not a
production.
fan of that production.
Yeah,
He did not think that made a whole lot of sense.
It was a tough one to watch.
How about Aaron Judge in that game? I think
Yeah,
it was 4 at-bats,
he was
4
zero.
struck out 4 times.
He did not, but he got a home run yesterday, so I just want to put that out there.
Did he dance on the taxis?
No.
he did not.
that's
no,
disappointing.
But he did
he's
come out
too
of the
large for
taxis.
that.
Yeah.
Yes.
The players were not dancing.
No.
There
That
were
would've got-
dancers.
If you want to get me to watch sports ball, that would do it.
Yeah.
Well, they put a microphone on one of the players during the game
Yes.
as it was
Jazz
going
Chisholm
on.
Jr.,
Jazz Chisholm,
yes.
yeah. And
Who's
so
my son's
it was-
favorite.
Really?
Is he really?
He dresses really rakishly. I think he's, I like him too.
He's got swagger.
A lot of swagger.
Yes, yes.
So did your son
yes.
like it? Did he think it was cool to get
Oh
to
yeah.
hear?
No, yeah. I mean, and it looked great. I don't know.
They're trying to
There's a lot of
attract the
criticism,
younger
but I thought it was
audience.
shot well.
Yes.
Again, beautiful weather in San Francisco that helped, and yeah, I don't know.
And they had the robot umpires for the first time.
Yes.
Yes,
And it
they
was
did
just
get their
exciting.
first call.
Season's begun.
I mean, I do know baseball has made some changes to try to make the games move faster and get a younger audience. So maybe if it's streaming with taxi dancers, that does it.
Yeah, taxi
There you
dancers.
All right, we are coming up on 8 o'clock here in New York. Stick with us. We've got a lot more ahead on Bloomberg this weekend.
Ahead in our next hour, we're going to hear from Arsenio Dominguez. He is the Secretary General of the International Maritime Organization. We'll get his perspective on what's going on in the Strait of Hormuz. That is in the next hour of Bloomberg This Weekend, which starts right now.
Welcome to Bloomberg This Weekend, live from New York with David Gura, Christina Ruffini, and Lisa Mateo. The latest headlines, key analysis, big interviews, and the stories that hit home on your days off.
Welcome, everybody. This is Bloomberg This Weekend, live from Bloomberg's World Headquarters in New York. I'm David Gura.
I'm Christina Ruffini. We're here with Lisa Mateo, and we are bringing you all the latest breaking news, reports, and analysis live this morning and every weekend from 7 to 10 a.m. and using the full force of our Bloomberg reporting team from around the world. Thank you, everyone who's been joining us this morning to give us their insight and their knowledge and making us smarter people on this Saturday.
Charting this morning, as we have over the last few weeks, the evolution of this war in the Middle East and this attack on a U.S. base in Saudi Arabia is certainly front of mind as we go through the news this morning. At least 10 people injured in that attack.
Yeah, those numbers seem to be going up. Associated Press is now reporting at least 15. Bloomberg itself is reporting at least 10. And more damage to those U.S. refueling airplanes, which we've seen have been struck throughout this conflict, partially, I think, because they're larger and easier targets, and partially because when you have an air base, they're usually parked slightly outside. They're just easier to get to. But it's also a sign that despite what the president is saying about Iran's military capability being degraded, they are still able to hit U.S. military installations and, of course, cause damage both economically and to infrastructure for American allies in the region.
I'm going to get an update here from Lisa in just a sec on all of this. But, of course, I think picking up on what you're saying, so true. You have a president of the United States seemingly very eager for this to wrap up or at least pause while some diplomatic negotiations take place through this Pakistani back channel.
Right.
That not happening as we see this war continuing to spread.
I did reach out to some sources on those negotiations. They say they are happening, but they wouldn't describe them as deep or particularly fruitful as of yet.
No public statement from the White House that Vice President J.D. Vance is in Pakistan. There was some speculation that might happen over the course of the weekend. Let's get a look at those headlines now from Lisa Mateo. Lisa?
Yeah, it seems like there's no end in sight for the 42-day shutdown. We have House Republicans rejecting that Senate DHS deal. Now, instead, what they did, they approved an entirely different plan. That new deal, it's an 8-week measure to temporarily fund the entire Department of Homeland Security. Both chambers of Congress now out on a 2-week recess. So now there's really no end in sight for that shutdown that had sparked long delays at airports nationwide with TSA shortages. President Donald Trump issued an order yesterday to use pre-existing funds to pay TSA agents. DHS said they would start seeing paychecks as early as Monday. Well, to the war in Iran, where the Houthis enter the conflict with a missile strike against Israel. Now, the Yemen-based militant group, they said they would continue operations until strikes on Iran and Hezbollah in Lebanon stop. And now Iran's semi-official Fars news agency reporting that multiple areas in eastern Tehran were struck today. Meanwhile, at least 10 U.S. troops have been injured in a missile strike on a Saudi air base. The AP now hiking that number up to 15. It comes after the U.S. Israel bombed Iranian nuclear and steel facilities. During his address at the Future Investment Initiative Summit in Miami, President Trump repeated calls for Iran to open the Strait of Hormuz.
There were 8 ships of oil coming out of Iran, and then they actually said, we're going to add an extra 2. And they added an extra 2, so we had 10 ships, and then people realized we were actually negotiating. And we're negotiating now, and it'd be great if we could do something, but they have to open it up. They have to open up the Strait of Hormuz.
There you go. The president recently pushed back his deadline for Iran to reopen that waterway or face strikes on power plants. Now, the war, it's hit the markets hard. Stocks falling to their lowest level more than 7 months on Friday. Brent crude, it rose about 4% to end the session above $112 a barrel. And today, thousands of protesters against the policies of President Trump, they're expected nationwide. Organizers behind the No Kings protests, they're saying it'll be their biggest showing yet. More than 3,000 events have been planned in cities across the U.S., with several more planned abroad, and that includes Mexico and Canada. David and Christina.
Just to see how that unfolds, Lisa. I know in New York there were protests in Manhattan and Brooklyn as well. The timing kind of varying across all of these places.
Yeah, there was one even in my town in New Jersey last time.
Yeah, D.C., before I moved up here, was like every weekend. If there's no Kings or something, it was a very, very active scene there. So we'll see how big those are. Thank you, Lisa. All right, we're going to turn now to the Middle East. We're going to go to Bloomberg News Deputy UAE Bureau Chief Abir Abu Omar, because one of the things we've been talking about, Abir, is how Gulf countries are reacting to this conflict. Not only how they're taking fire from Iran, how they're dealing with that, but how they're reacting, how they're dealing with the U.S., and whether or not they're trying to make moves to handle security on their own. Can you just kind of walk us through what's going on in the region and how the GCC countries are feeling?
Good morning, Christina. So yes, you're absolutely right. Gulf countries are in focus when it comes to this widening parameters of this conflict. You mentioned that the Houthis had reacted this morning, joining the conflict. They've remained not part of it for the past month or so, but are now part of it. So we're seeing the conflict really taking different shapes. When it comes to Gulf countries, including the biggest two in the region, that is the United Arab Emirates and Saudi Arabia, those countries we reported earlier are considering possibly weighing options to come in militarily. Now, this will only be the case if Iran attacks some vital infrastructure, including desalination plants, for example, in Saudi Arabia or the United Arab Emirates. Iran has continued its attacks against Gulf countries into the early hours of this morning, including, as you mentioned earlier, a base in Saudi Arabia, but also the KZAT facility in close to Abu Dhabi, on the way from Dubai to Abu Dhabi, but also Kuwait's airport and a facility in Oman as well, which has been a mediator. But Gulf countries are secretly telling reporters, we also reported earlier, that Gulf countries are starting to get really frustrated and angry at Iran and Iran's relentless attacks, but also the lack of objectives or the lack of clarity on the objectives from the U.S. administration, from President Donald Trump's administration. And they really fear a scenario here where the Trump administration reaches a deal with Iran, but it doesn't really dictate what it could be like in the future. Now, I mentioned earlier that Gulf countries, including UAE officials, have told us in the past that they were really anxious over Iran crossing red lines. Iran has done so now. It's crossed those red lines. It's attacked them directly. And so that is something that they're going to need some guarantees over when it comes to future purposes.
Abir, help us understand the way that the attacks that we saw yesterday are reverberating around the region. So they were preceded by the president saying that he was going to put in place this pause on attacking power plants, energy infrastructure. Seems Israel did that on the heels of that announcement from the president. How is that more degradation of infrastructure playing out across the region?
Look, I mean, the president did say that he's not going to attack plants and until the deadline of April 6th comes through. You mentioned earlier that he's given that deadline of April 6th until 8 p.m. Where no plants are going to be attacked, and for Iran to come back to the negotiation table. But we've seen attacks from both sides. Israel attacked a heavy water reactor facility in a nuclear plant in Iran yesterday. That led to the Houthis this morning attacking Israel. And so, you know, what is happening in the region is what I've been hearing from a lot of officials over the past week is this whiplash effect, where you get a lot of these geopolitical headlines from President Trump, but also from Iran, saying we're coming back to the negotiating table, with Iran to counter saying that's actually not going to happen. The plans or the proposals that have been thrown by both sides have been, by some people, nicknamed as a wish list. But it is a starting position by both Iran and the U.S. But the attacks have been continuing, possibly not on nuclear plants or wider energy facilities, but they have been going on across all the Gulf Arab nations and others.
Abir, thank you very much. Abir Abu Omar joining us from London this morning. She's Deputy UAE Bureau Chief. And of course, a roiling conversation continues around if the U.S. is going to put troops on the ground in Iran or elsewhere in the Middle East. We've seen those 2 Marine Expeditionary Units sent to the region, 82nd Airborne sent as well.
Right, the rhetoric from the White House doesn't quite match the operational force being sent into the region.
I'm glad you bring that up, because we did hear from Secretary of State Marco Rubio on all of this yesterday. Let's take a listen to what he had to say about the prospect of there being troops sent on the ground in the Middle East.
We're going to destroy their factories that make missiles and rockets and drones. We're going to destroy their Navy. We're going to destroy their Air Force. And we are going to significantly destroy their missile launchers so they can never hide behind these things to get a nuclear weapon. We are achieving all those objectives. We are ahead of schedule on most of them. And we can achieve them without any ground troops.
The Secretary of State yesterday talking about the prospect of there being troops on the ground in the Middle East. And 2 of our colleagues, Christina, have gamed out what that might look like under a variety of scenarios. We're lucky to have them with us this morning. We've got Becca Wasser, Bloomberg Economics' defense lead, and retired Colonel Wayne Sanders, our senior defense analyst at Bloomberg Intelligence. Becca, let's start with all of these categories. There's the seizure of Karg Island. There's a quarantine of Karg Island, neutralizing Iranian threats to Hormuz, escorting ships through the Strait, and seizing enriched uranium. I go through the analysis that both of you have done here. None of these seems like a not risky option here.
Yeah, there's nothing that says not going to
States.
happen on this sheet that we have in front of us here. Can you talk us through which are more likely and which are the most likely, I guess is how we want to phrase that this morning?
Yes, Becca, get us started.
So let's start with what is happening right now. And you see President Trump continuing to send more forces to the region, not only ground forces, but also dispatching yet another carrier strike group to the Middle East. And all of this is building up additional pressure at this juncture in time in order to try and bring Iran to the negotiating table. It's trying to signal that the U.S. is going to escalate further, as well as the fact that the U.S. may be in it for the long haul, which is something, frankly, that we heard from Secretary Rubio yesterday. But right now, if you are looking at what is being sent, the Marine Expeditionary Unit that is almost going to be there, the potential for the 82nd Airborne, as well as an additional Marine Expeditionary Unit, those are insufficient for a ground invasion of Iran. Those are insufficient to hold large swaths of territory. So any of the potential scenarios, a seizure of Karg Island or one of the other islands, creating a buffer zone along Iran's coastline to neutralize some of the drone and missile threat to ships, the potential for special operations forces to go in to try and find and seize Iran's stockpile of highly enriched uranium, those are the riskiest scenarios. The ones that have American troops on Iranian soil are highly risky, and they're most likely not going to have the effect that President Trump wants.
I know we want to talk a lot about Karg Island. Before we get there, though, Colonel Sanders, let me turn to you and ask about seizing enriched uranium. I had the great fortune of sitting down with Admiral James Stavridis earlier this week, who back in the 80s was kind of squiring Kuwaiti tankers through the Strait during the Iran-Iraq War. And he said that was difficult then, when they were being shot at. They didn't have to deal with drones. We talked about this, going after enriched uranium, and he was explaining to do this, obviously you need to have folks who are capable of dealing with this nuclear material. It's heavy. You actually would have to have civilians who knew a thing or two about nuclear material as well. Walk us through that scenario quickly before we get into the Karg Island scenario.
Absolutely. You want to put boots on the ground in Natanz or Fordo. You're trying to be able to put these pieces together. You have to have enough security to be able to have what we call an inner cordon and an outer cordon for security's sake. Not to mention that at this point in time, Iran news media has already picked up on the fact that this is an option for the United States. So in the past, when this could have potentially been something that was done by special forces, as well as some type of infantry unit that could get in and get out to be able to do that, they now have eyes on. They now know that this is one of the options. So they're going to be prepared for that, which, as Becca's talking about, a lot of this then raises that escalation portfolio and it starts to that risk calculus to say, do I want to go in there knowing that everybody's going to be looking for now United States indicators and warnings that we're doing that. Increased airlift going to a specific region, the specific scientists or civilians that would need to be able to go to identify these things. And not to mention, you've now created a stationary position of U.S. forces that for drone strikes, ballistic missiles, all of the things that you've seen up until now that's been directed somewhere else, you see an uptick in Iranian ones directed specifically against U.S. forces in the region.
Becca, I also want to ask you, we've got this tweet that you tweeted, or whatever X did, whatever we're calling it now.
Whatever.
Posted, you social media'd. It's very interesting because we've talked a lot about capacity and munitions and how many of these interceptors everybody's got left. And you write, routine reminder that the U.S. has only bought 322 Tomahawks in the last 5 years. If the U.S. shot 850 in Iran, plus the low estimates of 250 for strikes in the Middle East and Nigeria, it is clear replenishment rates do not match expenditure rates. The math isn't mathing, as they say. Can you explain to us why that's significant and what you think the stockpile of these interceptors, Tomahawks, weapons is, and how that impacts a seizure of Karg Island or anything else the administration might want to do in the region?
You are absolutely right to point to the fact that there are material constraints, and those might actually shape some of the operations moving forward. So for some of the long-range standoff weapons like Tomahawk missiles, which have been used in the Iran attacks and frankly has been the Trump administration's weapon of choice in previous operations, those have been purchased in only finite amounts. And frankly, the Department of Defense didn't even buy any in fiscal years 24 and I believe 25. And so that means that there's a scarce number that exists, and with the amount of the rate that they are being fired at, there isn't the same rate of procurement as well as production. And so that means that for these long-range standoff weapons that would be highly needed in a potential scenario against a more advanced adversary, say a potential war with China in the Indo-Pacific, those would be so needed, but stockpiles might be low. So there is a question of future US readiness. And on the air defense interceptors, listen, in any conflict, and frankly pre-conflict, there's never enough air defense to go around. We've seen that in places like Ukraine, and we're seeing that play out right now. And I think the complicating factor here is that so many of the countries that are potentially running low on air defense interceptors are frankly reliant on US equipment, and the US can't ramp up production in order to backfill them as fast as possible. There's also the emphasis right now of drones as opposed to missiles, and that is driving the need for some of these counter drone systems, which frankly the US hasn't really rolled out in high number because frankly the US is kind of coming a little bit late to this problem set. So right now, there is this need for some advanced munitions as well as some of these air defense interceptors, but also these newer technologies to get after a very serious and critical drone threat, as we saw with the mixed drone and missile attack on Prince Sultan Air Base in Saudi Arabia just the other day.
Becca, what is the turnaround on ordering up a Tomahawk? Once obviously the administration doesn't want to telegraph that they're going to be doing a major military move by all of a sudden back ordering a bunch of these munitions. But once they know they're going to need to replenishing those stockpiles, how long does it take from placing the order in into delivery?
So I actually think it's a really strong signal of deterrence and resilience if the US continues to order these weapons. And that's because it signals that there is going to be replenishment and that there is going to be a need. And in fact, to be honest, most countries and potential adversaries expect this, particularly in a protracted conflict where you have the potential for these periods of fighting and then rest and reconstitution. And so if we're looking at the number of Tomahawks that we said were expended, that 850 plus 250 number, that's about 15 years worth of production. So that just gives you a sense of timelines. None of these are fast. None of these come off the production line very quickly. We are oftentimes looking at years, if not longer. And part of the department's efforts right now are trying to ramp up production. But I think a lot of those goals of ramping production are more in the 2030 timeframe. So it's going to be a while until we get to that place.
I want to play a bit more sound here from the Secretary of State, again, talking about the prospects of this war widening in the way that the U.S. has entered it. Let's take a listen to what he had to say yesterday in France.
Well, it hasn't happened yet. Nothing yet has been diverted, but it could. I mean, frankly, it's not diverted. These are not diverted weapons. These are our weapons. These are sales. These are military sales through Pearl, paid for by NATO. And so the question at some point is, if we have a need, let me be clear. If the United States has a military need, whether it is to replenish our stocks or to fulfill some mission in the national interest of the United States, we're always going to come first.
There he is, Colonel Sanders, talking about the prospect of weapons that had been earmarked for Ukraine having to be moved to the Middle East. We had a great conversation with Ambassador Bill Taylor a little while ago about that. But what does the fact that we're having this conversation say about the U.S.'s capacity to be dealing with both of these wars, these two fronts simultaneously?
Well, it says a lot in terms of, like Becca said, from a demand and a production perspective. The nice thing, though, I do want to put into context one of the questions you asked, Becca, is when you look at ramp up of production, right now is one of the areas that you've actually seen a lot of movement, right? Even prior to the Iran war, $9.8 billion for additional PAC-3 interceptors to Lockheed Martin, specifically for our Patriot systems to be able to get after that. 3 different framework acquisition agreements were made with BAE, Honeywell, and others, even this week, to quadruple the ramp up of production for these. And these are deals that started in the past. So you've actually seen, even on the Tomahawk front, where you would normally have between 70 to 100 that are made per year, they're ramping up to over 300 is the plan for RTX. SM-6 interceptors that are used on our destroyers, as well as another one, THAAD interceptors. You're seeing a ramp up of the entire production chain. And some of that can be done without having to put in a lot more CapEx. Other ones will still be on the OpEx side. but you can still actually throw in additional lines to be able to increase that production rate. So I talked previously about the fact that you also, for a majority of the things that are going on in Iran right now, are still precision guided munitions, which are GPS guided gravity bombs that are just dropped because we have air superiority. So that actually saves a lot of our Tomahawk missiles, what are known as JASSM and LRASM and AMRAAM missiles that come from some of those are our long range capabilities that would be used in a near peer scenario in 2027 and beyond. So the Pentagon has made that shift to try and save as many of those as possible.
I know that Christina wants to ask about cost, but before we get there, Becca, let me just ask you about the prospects of there being a seizure of Karg Island or a quarantine of Karg Island. My understanding is there are like 20,000 people on that island, and I'm just curious sort of what that looks like to you. Just play out what a ground invasion of Karg Island would look like. I mentioned earlier we've got 1,000 members of the 82nd Airborne headed to the region. Is this something that would be done aerially? What does it look like? Just a very basic question.
Yeah, so let's war game live on air. Let's do this. So essentially what you could have is the Marine Expeditionary Unit doing an amphibious landing on Karg, trying to seize out some of those defenses that have been reportedly built up on Karg Island, even after the U.S. Had struck it previously to try and degrade some of those defenses. So you could have them initially try and seize the island and hold territory and move towards that airstrip that the U.S. previously bombed, but would probably need to try and fix in order to drop the 82nd Airborne in. It's also worth noting that, yes, while the United States has gained air superiority in key parts of Iran, it does not have air superiority over the entire country and over all parts of the Strait. This is, again, because there is this missile and drone threat. So that would require a great deal of additional resources, ISR, additional fighters, trying to keep the forces that are moving onto the island or being dropped onto the island, trying to keep them as safe as possible and try and neutralize some of those threats, because it still is a contested environment in many respects. So it's a highly risky endeavor just to get forces on the island, let alone be able to clear the island of any potential threats and to be able to hold it over time. If the US is trying to hold it, again, think about all of the additional resources that would be required. It would require 24/7 intelligence, surveillance, and reconnaissance assets. It would require so much additional capability in order to keep those forces on the island safe. And that, I think, is a big deal.
Sorry to interrupt there. We only have about a minute left. And Colonel Sanders, I do indeed want to ask about cost, because you guys are estimating it's costing $15 to $20 billion per month to sustain this conflict. Can you put that into perspective?
This is definitely a war that's not measured in years, right? It's pretty much, it's measured off of a $20 billion a month burn rate at this point. $11 billion were spent on the first 6 days of this war, but then you have to be able to pull it back and say, okay, we are now at steady state operations. So we're over 100 billion total at this point in time. OIF, you saw about 806 billion to 1.7 trillion for Operation Iraqi Freedom, if you're trying to put it into context for how those are. But you're paying for missiles, carrier strike group operations, surge capacities, keeping the supply chain running 24/7, as well as, like Becca mentioned, the intelligence, surveillance, and reconnaissance assets that are absolutely key over that region.
All right, Colonel Wayne Sanders, Bloomberg Intelligence Senior Defense Analyst, and of course, Becca Wasser, Bloomberg's Economics Defense Lead. Thank you both so much. It was a really fascinating article.
You can check out both pieces of that analysis at Bloomberg.com or, of course, in the Bloomberg terminal as well, including the cost analysis we talked about there at the end. Well, yesterday, Iran notified the United Nations that it will, quote, facilitate and expedite humanitarian aid and agricultural shipments through the Strait of Hormuz. This tentative plan, a major breakthrough for the 20,000 seafarers trapped on ships in the Strait as the war continues with no end in sight. Christina spoke with the UN's International Maritime Organization Secretary General Arsenio Dominguez earlier this week about that situation.
Mr. Secretary, thank you so much for being back with us. I know last time we spoke, that number of stranded seafarers was higher, I think. Has it come down at all? Is 20,000 about right? And how are these individuals doing?
No, 20,000 is about right. And of course, there's been very little movement around the Strait of Hormuz. So we're still very concerned with the health and the well-being of these seafarers. The longer that this conflict continues, the more that the stress and fatigue starts to kick in. Also, the supplies on the ships And this is one of the areas where they're really working with the littoral states in the Persian Gulf in order to, at least with all the challenges that exist right now, to provide those essential goods that the seafarers and the ships need in order to stay safe.
Can I ask a really dumb question? Why can't they just go into port? Why can't they find safe harbors to go into? Why do they have to stay on the water? Is it a permitting issue? Is it a size issue? Why can't they come in?
We're talking about nearly or around 2,000 vessels. And of course, that there's not enough capacity for all these vessels in the ports in the area, as well as the fact that even some of those ports facilities may be targeted as well. And the reality is that there will not be space for all those ships to dock at the same time. There's also not a possibility to carry out crew changes right now, a very limited one, particularly because there are other disruptions, including air transportation. Plus, it will be very difficult to actually have volunteer seafarers that would like to go and move into a ship that is still in a conflict area. And I wouldn't blame any seafarers not wanting to go there.
Yeah, it's not safe or even viable to swap out the crews. I mean, I guess that makes sense. So what do you do? Is the UN working on an evacuation plan? Are you trying to coordinate with these countries? Because at the start of this, when we first started speaking, these ships were going on voyages that were going to take a little bit of time. So they did have some supplies, but they have to be running low by now. And I would imagine this is getting pretty urgent that you need to either get those ships moving or get those seafarers out of there.
Oh, that's correct. And that's why de-escalation, it's the main message that I will maintain, because that would allow us to continue to go back to the trade as we know it in the Strait of Hormuz. The reality right now is that we're very grateful to the countries in the region that they continue to provide with the challenges some supplies to these vessels for the seafarers to keep going. That's also the fact that even remotely, the companies, the ship owners and ship operators, as well as the countries, are providing that assistance in order to address mental health and fatigue and making the communications between the seafarers and their families just to keep them informed as well. And we are getting information and stories from the seafarers of the ordeal that they're actually experiencing there.
I've seen some of them calling into some of our sister competing networks. Some of the captains have been doing some interviews. But I mean, I would imagine that's difficult too. Communications aren't incredibly reliable when you're on that kind of vessel. Are you doing anything? Last time you said you were concerned about their mental health. Is there anything being done? Are there people they can talk to through their companies? Or are they just trying to hang in there until they can get home and see their loved ones?
No, there are actions that the companies and the countries are taking on board with this. There are some countries that have installed and established helplines 24/7 for the seafarers to have that communications. Other companies are providing that expertise remotely as well for the seafarers. What we're also doing on behalf of the member states at the IMO is that last week, during the extraordinary session of the Council, we agreed to move forward in establishing an evacuation mechanism or a corridor in order to start allowing those ships to sail through the Strait of Hormuz. And it's one of those diplomatic conversations and negotiations that I'm starting to carry out, particularly with all the countries involved in the region.
How would that work? Can you give us any details of how that evacuation humanitarian corridor would work? Because you would, in theory, need to get Iran's sign-on for that, correct?
Oh, absolutely. And it's one of the first countries that I'm starting the conversations with, together with all the other countries in the region and countries beyond the region, because the reality is that this conflict, and by bringing shipping to a standstill, it's affecting us all globally. So right now, the first steps is, of course, how we're going to bring the parties together in order to allow us to follow through with the decision at IMO last week. We can carry out the operational aspects. The traffic separation schemes, which is like a corridor for the ships to move in and out in this area, already exist since 1968. So for us, it's very simple to actually put this in operation. What we need is the political will and the compromises for the countries in order for the ships to start sailing, starting with those that have been there running short on supplies and that need some evacuations, or seafarers that need some further assistance.
The U.S. has offered to do military escorts of some of these ships through the Strait. Do you think that would help or hinder this plan for a humanitarian corridor? Do you think that would make it harder for Iran to accept, or do you think that would make it easier to facilitate the evacuation of these ships?
One of the concerns that I keep repeating in relation to naval escorts on merchant ships is that it doesn't eliminate 100% the risk of a ship being targeted by a drone or a missile. And that will put the life of a seafarer at risk, something that we cannot accept. So what we're working on It's in the operational aspects and the diplomacy. Also, we need to remember that the Strait of Hormuz is quite narrow. In the shortest area, it's around just over 30 kilometers wide. There needs to be very proper coordination and cooperation between any countries that will rely or will provide this kind of assistance. But it is not sustainable and it's not a long-term solution.
It also sounds to me like you're saying you think it's safer to have a diplomatic, agreed-to humanitarian corridor that Iran and other parties have signed on to rather than a military escort with the U.S.'s help.
Absolutely. It's for years, for decades, the Strait of Hormuz have been operating ships in and out without any issues. All the technical measures and operational measures have been in place for a while, and every single mariner knows what to do whenever they get to the Strait of Hormuz and how to trade in the region. What we need is to de-escalate, allow shipping to continue to operate as normal, and that is something that we can do through diplomacy and negotiations.
I also want to ask you about your communications with Iran. Are you speaking to them directly? Are you speaking to them through intermediaries? And are you speaking to the U.S. directly or through intermediaries?
I speak to all the member states of IMO, and of course that includes the United States and the Islamic Republic of Iran. They have permanent representations here in London, and I maintain contact, continuous conversations with them, face-to-face, remotely, you name it. The main task that I will carry out here is as well is maintain that role into bringing the parties together, having the conversations, finding the ways that we can agree on how to assist the vessels, because every single country at IMO repeated the same message. We should not be affecting negatively shipping because of these geopolitical situations. We need to respect freedom of navigation, and seafarers have to be protected and not to be used as collateral damage.
President Trump has said Iran let a tanker or two through. Is that accurate? Have you seen any kind of movement?
We are tracking movement around the Strait of Hormuz. Of course, before the conflict started, there was around, on average, 130 vessels that would pass every day. Right now, those numbers are very limited, from 2 to 5.
Yeah.
And there are some conversations between the Islamic Republic of Iran and other countries in order to get some agreements for some ships to actually sail through.
I also want to ask, we've talked about the humans on these ships, but there is also concern about some of the cargo on these ships, including fertilizer and other perishable goods. Some of it could become unstable and dangerous. Some of it could be rotting in these cargo holds. How big of a concern is that? And is that likely at this point? And what do you do about that?
Right now, those are the reasons why we always will need to have seafarers on board the vessels, because they can manage those situations and take any operational necessary action. But of course, the main concern continues to be the supplies. And once we actually have this evacuation corridor in place, then we can take on board all those concerns in relation to the cargoes that are on board and which are the first ships that need to sail through the Strait of Hormuz.
All right, Secretary Arsenio Dominguez, he's the UN International Maritime Organization Secretary General. Thank you so much for coming back and checking in with us.
I thought it was interesting that he pointed out that that's one of the reasons these seafarers need to stay on the ships is to monitor the cargo, because it's not just things like food that are perishable, but it's also things like fertilizer that can become unstable and dangerous if it's left to, rot or overheat or any of the above. And they need to stay on there, not only because it's hard to get them off at the moment, but because of the safety of the cargo and the other ships in the area.
I keep going back to this conversation I had with Admiral Stavridis, and I'll hawk the podcast once again. It's the latest episode of the Big Take podcast here from Bloomberg. But what he talked about
we're all here for your cross-promotion.
We're all here. I love to cross-promote. Is how we're talking about this particular strait, but there's also the Suez Canal, there's Bab el-Mandeb. There are other places where Iran could wreak some havoc and really upset the flow of traffic and the supply chain going forward here. So,
well, and as we heard from Abir, the Saudis have redoubled their efforts. They do have a few pipelines, and they've just onboarded a new one that goes out to the Red Sea. But that's also an area that Houthis can hit and have before. So if that's cut off as well, there are other areas, not just the Strait, as you mentioned, that can be dangerous and that can really impact global trade and global shipping.
And not to put too fine a point on it, but the fact that the Houthis here have entered the chat or entered the war is hugely significant. I think there's been an open question since the start of this conflict. Will they, would they, what might they do? And what we got from them this morning in that post on Telegram is just that they are going to be involved in this going forward. Israel tracking that missile that had been flown from Yemen, and I think that stands to really accelerate what we've been seeing here.
And also, as the Iranian regime is degraded or compromised or overwhelmed, they never had a lot of command and control over these proxy groups. They always had plausible deniability, but even if they wanted it, can they control them if they decide to settle for peace?
Yes. Well, coming up here, it's not just oil tankers stuck in the middle of this conflict. American farmers are feeling the pinch as well. We're going to talk to one of them coming up next, right here on Bloomberg This Weekend, on Bloomberg Television, Bloomberg Radio, Bloomberg.com, and on the Bloomberg Business app.
Thank you for joining us live on Bloomberg This Weekend. I'm Lisa Mateo. Let's get you up to date with some of the top stories. And Tiger Woods, he is released on bail after being arrested on suspicion of DUI. Authorities say Woods' Land Rover had clipped a truck and rolled onto its side yesterday afternoon in Jupiter Island, Florida. A breath test, it showed no alcohol in his system. Investigators believe his impairment was due to medication or drugs. Woods was previously involved in a car crash in 2021 that left him with serious injuries. Keeping with sports, March Madness, where St. John's gave it their all, but in the end, they lost to Duke. Sorry, 75-80. Duke, though, it now heads to the Elite Eight along with UConn, Michigan, and Tennessee. If you're keeping track today, Iowa, they take on Illinois, and Purdue challenges Arizona. And you've heard about airport security with times reaching historic levels due to that partial government shutdown. Well, now more travelers are going to extremes to avoid the wait times. Private jet companies, they've seen a surge in bookings, costs reaching as much as $34,000 during peak demand. And local entrepreneurs, they're also charging as much as $1,200 to wait in line for passengers. David and Christina, so those same ones, I guess, that wait in line for stores and releases, they're now waiting in airports for people who don't want to. And they're getting some serious money.
I've never flown a private jet, but I will say, and you know this, when you fly on the Air Force 2, Air Force 3, these military planes, it is the joy of your life because you just get on the plane. They do screen you, but there are no rules about how big your shampoos can be. You can take whatever you want. There's no baggage limits, and you just get on the plane.
No Ziploc bag required.
No Ziploc bags required. It is lovely, and it's not the normal experience, and I miss it just a little bit,
Lisa Mateo, thank you very much for
Thanks,
those
Lisa.
headlines. The supply chain disruption brought by the Iran war affecting farmers dramatically. As Chrystia Freeland explained, she's a contributor to Wall Street Week. She's also former Deputy Prime Minister of Canada and the incoming CEO of the Rhodes Trust.
Farmers are very affected by the price of fertilizer. Fertilizer accounts for, about 25% of the costs for a farmer. And this is happening just at seeding time as they're getting ready to plant their crops. And it's happening at a time when farmers have been really beaten up. The trade wars have been really hard for farmers, for American farmers, I should say. COVID was really, really hard for farmers. And Russia's invasion of Ukraine and the economic impact was really hard for farmers.
Joining us now is John Bartman, fifth-generation farmer. He farms corn and soybean in Illinois. Great to see you, John. And I want to start with fertilizer. Chrystia Freeland, they're saying it's about 25% of the cost for farmers. Walk us through how much, in broad strokes, you're paying for fertilizer each year, and what's changed, if anything, over the course of the last 4 or 5 weeks?
Well, David, first of all, I just want everybody to understand that standing behind me, I have 2 fertilizer tanks, and those fertilizer tanks hold liquid urea, which is 32% the industry standard. And last year, by the way, this is enough to plant 100 acres of corn. And last year, that cost me $11,000 to fill those tanks. 2 weeks ago, it was $17,000, and now today it's close to $21,000 and climbing.
Do you have what you need to start the season? I know it's not just how much it's costing, but whether or not it's going to get to you guys.
And that is an excellent point, and that is the $64,000 question. I know a lot of people have prepaid for their fertilizer, but are you going to get it? And the analogy I've been telling people, it was very similar to if your kid had a video game that they really wanted for Christmas and you ordered it in October and COVID happened. Were you going to get that game or not in time? Same thing with what we're dealing with right now with fertilizer.
You bring up COVID, and I think of all the supply chain disruptions that happened then. Was it anything analogous to what we're seeing now? Was it hard to get that urea fertilizer then, or is this something that's novel, something you haven't experienced before as a farmer?
It's getting worse, and I think what people also need to understand is that 20%, at least 20% of the demand for fertilizer now is due to Trump's first trade war, because during that time period, Brazil massively increased their acreage. They went from 80 million acres to up to 120 million acres of soybeans. And now they're planting over 50 million acres of corn. They were never in that category before. And not to mention, their soil isn't as fertile as ours here in the Midwest. So they need more fertilizer. And not to mention, many areas of Brazil, they have year-round growing seasons. So that fertilizer is going nonstop. And we're in a world market right now. And we need to be aware of that. And we as farmers in the collateral damage here in Illinois and the rest of the United States.
We have some sound from the president from last night on the farm bill I want you to take a listen to.
Thanks to our trade deals, you're now sending over $40 billion in American soybeans to China. I want to thank President Xi of China, because we had a deal at 20, and I said, could you do me a favor? It's a big place. Could you double it? And he said, what are you talking about? I said, could you make it 40 instead of 20? And he overrode all of his people. He said, all right, I'll do it. And you got 40 instead of 20. So now you go out and buy bigger tractors. What can I tell you? I'm also asking Congress to quickly pass the new farm bill. And today I'm promising to request additional farm relief for our great patriots in the next funding bill. So we have you taken care of in both instances, and we're pushing very hard for the new farm bill.
Is there anything in that farm bill that you think is going to help? Will it help? And do you think it'll pass?
Well, he also said yesterday, too, that I gave you $12 billion and you farmers are making so much money right now.
Yeah, how's that going?
You know, so, and not to mention that we're still waiting for the supposedly 8 million metric tons that China was going to buy again this month, too. It's, who knows what the guy is going to say next. And it's just very, very unfortunate, the situation that we're in. And we're in another man-made crisis caused by Donald Trump right now. And it's just frustrating. We need a farm bill. I think the Republicans are very nervous about getting a farm bill passed. They want to get it passed because they don't want to open up the Pandora's box of dealing with the SNAP program again, which they ripped out through the big, beautiful bill. And there are other wonderful conservation programs that aren't funded like they used to be. I'd much rather be talking with you guys today about carbon sequestration and that new market, which we should be talking about, that has really been put on the back shelf thanks to the Trump administration right now. So I'm very bearish, unfortunately. And that's kind of why I'm actually growing more corn this year, because I knew I at least have a market for it.
Come back anytime, John. We'll talk about sequestration of carbon if you want to. But let me ask you quickly. Got about a minute left, and I don't know if viewers saw it, but the president was speaking in front of this gilded tractor yesterday at the White House, gold tractor, and he said he's going to go to John Deere and internationally to other companies and say, make less expensive farm equipment. Putting that aside, how do you think about making big capital investments like that at this moment? Is it something you can even weigh at this point in time because of all the uncertainty?
His quote-unquote bailout program gave farmers for soybeans $30 an acre. John Deere's new X9 combine is officially the first implement that's over $1 million. So when, according to the University of Illinois, last year every farmer lost $100 an acre. This year, according to the American Farm Bureau, every single commodity that we grow is unprofitable. And there's a reason why last year all the farm equipment that was sold is half of what it was during Biden's last year in his administration.
John, before we let you go quickly, if there's one thing that this government could do for farmers across America, what would that be?
Increase our demand. We have to increase the demand for our products. And we need stability. And right now we're losing out to South America with the South American Free Trade Agreement with Europe. And Canada right now is joining with the South American Free Trade Agreement. It's absolutely crazy. We are in a world economy, and we've been exporting food since the colonial days. And that's what we do in this country. We feed people. And this administration needs to understand that.
John Bartman, thank you so much. Great to speak with you. And Christina, just on your point, I think we had this time when USAID was taking so much of what farmers in the U.S. produced, sent it to places around the world. That, of course, has changed dramatically over the last year plus.
It's also, farming has always been hard. Look, I was a 4-H kid, more ranching in Colorado than farming. That's right. My goat was reserve grand champion at the Colorado State Fair.
chuckles from
We
Lisa
heard the
across the
laugh from
studio.
Lisa.
But look, farming is hard, and the people who do it are very dedicated. And being able to predict the next season, it's hard enough with weather and natural resources and everything else, let alone economic demand and shipping and things like fertilizer. It's just becoming very untenable at a time when it's already really tough to
That was the
make.
name of your goat, Reserve Grand Champion?
No, that was my prize. The goat's
sorry.
name was Pepper.
Pepper the goat.
Pepper the goat. She was lovely. We miss her.
Oh, John Bartman, thank you once again. A big announcement this week from OpenAI, dropping support for its popular video creation app Sora. What is behind that shifting strategy in the trillion-dollar AI business is coming up next here on Bloomberg This Weekend, on Bloomberg Television and Bloomberg Radio.
Welcome back to Bloomberg This Weekend. I'm Christina Ruffini here with David Gura. OpenAI, the company behind ChatGPT, abruptly pulled the plug on its popular video creation service this week, just months after its debut.
Is this a sign of a shifting strategy in the trillion-dollar AI arms race? Mandeep Singh is Bloomberg Intelligence's global head of technology research, and he joins us now. Mandeep, I remember when this deal was announced with Disney, I was filling it on surveillance, and I was not shy about mocking it. I thought, wow, all of this investment that we've gotten in AI, and the result is you've got, whistling Mickey walking around the streets of New York in 2026. I mean, I was very curious about what OpenAI
People on the internet were very excited about this.
They were momentarily. What does this signal? How do you read this decision by OpenAI to discontinue this project and for Disney, as a result of that, to walk away?
I mean, look, right now, when you look at the success of Anthropic and the traction that they have had over the past 3 to 4 months, I mean, they've been adding billions in revenue every week. So why that has happened? It's because, the coding agent release they had has really taken off. So when you think about it from an OpenAI's perspective, they had their hands in too many things. And, obviously they have the ChatGPT consumer-focused subscription. But when you compare that to what Anthropic is doing now, they had to, do something about it. And it sounds like they want to narrow down their focus in this category of coding agents. And what that means is they have to shift the compute that they were using for, something like Sora, where you do need a lot of compute for these short form videos, both for training and inferencing. And I think this is a strategic pivot because they see the addressable market is a lot more larger in this area of coding agents and enterprise workflows, and they want to go after that along with Anthropic.
Do you think we're going to see more of this? Because one of the criticisms about how some companies are using AI is they're just kind of throwing it at everything as a catch-all, like it'll fix everything, make it there. And there isn't a lot of focus or a lot of strategy to it. And as it's getting more expensive, do you think we're going to see more companies start to try to really laser target what they're doing with this technology?
I mean, the one that comes to mind is Meta. And clearly, they've been investing a lot when it comes to their CapEx. And they don't really have a strategy in terms of what their core focus area is and what is the model good at. So from that perspective, the same question could be asked about Meta. And most likely, I think Meta will focus on the consumer side. Similar to what Google has been able to do with, adding more generative AI to their core search and how they have, really changed their strategy for Gemini. But from that perspective, I think Meta also will have to narrow down their focus. And they seem to be doing that because they've scaled back on Reality Labs and Metaverse. And it just remains to be seen what they're going after because it's not very clear right now.
I want to go back to this bet on the enterprise. So I've heard Dario Amodei speak. He talked a lot about how that's been Anthropic's goal here. That was a strategic decision that they made. And I think we focused a lot on kind of the varying principles between these two companies, between Anthropic and OpenAI. But it strikes me in this moment, it seems like Anthropic made that bet. They're reaping sizable rewards from it. And I wonder, and I'd love for you to weigh in on this, how OpenAI has dealt with that. Yes, they're open to doing enterprise work, but as you point out, it's consumers who use ChatGPT largely. And has that sort of colored our perception of what that company is and what it can do going forward?
Absolutely. And look, when I look at OpenAI's revenue projections, because there have been some leaks about, what they're going for through 2030 and beyond. And to get to 200 billion plus in revenue, they have to decide what is it that will be the primary driver. It sounds like they feel it's going to be more on the enterprise side. than the consumer subscriptions, because yes, they have to launch ads and they are doing that in parallel. It's not going to monetize at the same rate as, enterprise workflows or coding agents could do, because it's real. Right now, we are seeing, $1 billion in revenue for Anthropic and some of these products that they have launched. And that is the kind of traction you want OpenAI to be participating in that large addressable market. So to my mind, they need their models and the products to be focused in that category. And that's what they'll be doing, at least for the next few months.
Mandeep, I also want to ask you, it has certainly been an interesting and eventful week across market sectors, but talk to us about what was going on with tech stocks this week.
I mean, this has been one of the worst weeks for tech stocks over the past 50 years. And partly that has to do with, I think, what's going on at the macro level. Clearly, inflation expectations going up are never good for digital ad spending. So you see Meta and Alphabet really underperforming for the week. But beyond that, there is that, risk associated with the capex ramp up, even though we are, talking about it 2 weeks after NVIDIA said they have the line of sight to $1 trillion in revenue. And they had that conservative estimate because, they're not even counting some of the other products that they feel will see traction with this AI build out. So from that perspective, the macro setup coupled with higher inflation expectations is what's dragging down some of these mega cap companies. But there is no doubt that, the demand for AI infrastructure is still insatiable. And from that perspective, everyone wants to invest in AI right now. And that, I don't think, is changing anytime soon.
Mandeep, thank you very much for the perspective. Mandeep Singh, our head of global technology research at Bloomberg Intelligence. Indeed, Christina, looking at the way markets performed yesterday, it was the Nasdaq 100 that fell into correction territory. So that agitation around AI clearly manifested in those tech stocks yesterday. We're going to talk about this a bit in the next hour here too. The kind of general concern about AI as we look at these mega IPOs that are coming here from SpaceX, Anthropic,
right, and the demand is there,
OpenAI.
but the applications are TBD in a couple cases.
All right, we are coming up in the 9 a.m. hour here in New York. In our next hour, retired General Mark Kimmitt is going to join us as the war in Iran hits the 1 month mark. That's coming up.
Coming up on Bloomberg this weekend, American troops injured as a new rebel group enters the war and the S&P slumps.
They have to open it up. They have to open up the Strait of Hormuz.
What the president and the Secretary of State are saying about a timeline.
And no deal on funding for the Department of Homeland Security.
There's chaos at airports throughout the land.
House Republicans revolt, rejecting a bipartisan bill from the Senate.
I spoke to the president a few moments ago. He understands exactly what we're doing and why.
What's next and when TSA agents will get paid.
And Tiger Woods released from jail after a rollover crash and DUI arrest just 2 weeks before the Masters. New questions this morning about his future in golf. Welcome back to Bloomberg This Weekend. We are coming to you live from Bloomberg World Headquarters in New York. I'm Christina Ruffini.
I'm David Gura, along with Lisa Mateo. It is Saturday, March the 28th. A lot of news this morning out of the Middle East. Something that caught my eye just a moment ago is that east-west pipeline in Saudi Arabia, that alternative way to get oil. Exactly. Now met its target of 7 million barrels a day. And we were having that fascinating conversation about an hour ago about the way that UAE's infrastructure is still coming back to life. There are other ways to get this oil out, but clearly, Strait of Hormuz is still so critically important here, and there hasn't been much inroads made in opening that up, getting ships through there.
There are other ways, but not at the volume that's needed to keep this sustained level of production. And at the moment, there are just no real alternatives. I think as we go forward, it is something we're going to possibly be hearing more about because it's expensive, it's hard to do, but it might be necessary. However, at the moment, it's kind of a waiting game.
Let's get a check of the headlines now with our colleague and friend Lisa Mateo. Lisa?
You got it. In the DHS shutdown, it drags on, and this is after House Republicans, they reject a funding deal and approve a different plan all in itself. Now, the deal they rejected, that was cut by their own Senate GOP counterparts. The new plan, it's an 8-week measure to temporarily fund the entire Department of Homeland Security. Both chambers of Congress now out on a 2-week recess, so now there is no end in sight for that shutdown that has sparked long delays at airports nationwide with TSA shortages. President Donald Trump issued an order yesterday to use pre-existing funds to pay TSA agents. DHS said they would start seeing paychecks as early as Monday. To the war in Iran now, where the Houthis enter the conflict with a missile strike against Israel. The Yemen-based militant group that said they would continue operations until strikes on Iran and Hezbollah in Lebanon stop. And now Iran's semi-official Fars news agency reports that multiple areas in eastern Tehran were struck today. Meanwhile, the Associated Press reporting 15 U.S. troops have been injured in a missile strike on a Saudi airbase. It comes after the U.S. and Israel bombed Iranian nuclear and steel facilities. Now, during his address at the Future Investment Initiative Summit in Miami, President Trump repeated calls for Iran to open the Strait of Hormuz.
There were 8 ships of oil coming out of Iran. And then they actually said, we're going to add an extra 2. And they added an extra 2, so we had 10 ships. And then people realized we were actually negotiating. And we're negotiating now, and it'd be great if we could do something, but they have to open it up. They have to open up the Strait of Hormuz.
Well, the Strait of Hormuz, it does remain largely closed, but we're learning that 2 more India-bound LPG tankers have exited the Persian Gulf. Thailand also said it had secured assurances from Iran, allowing its ships to pass through the strait. Brent crude, it rose about 4% to close above $112 a barrel on Friday, while stocks, well, they fell to their lowest levels in more than 7 months. And today, thousands of protests against the policies of President Trump, well, they're expected nationwide. Organizers behind the No Kings protests, they're saying it'll be their biggest showing yet. More than 3,000 events have been planned in cities across the U.S., several more planned abroad, and that includes Mexico and Canada. David and Christina.
Worst week for the S&P 500 in 4 years, I think, going back to 2022. So brutal day on Wall Street. Yesterday, brutal week as well. Lisa, thank you very much. Lawmakers facing a split screen of priorities right now. President Trump speaking in Miami at a Saudi business forum, focusing on Iran and a potential future conflict.
And Cuba's next, by the way, but pretend I didn't say that, please. Pretend I didn't say that. Please, 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 media, please disregard that statement. Thank you very much.
So there is that, geopolitical adventurism. While at Capitol Hill, Congress people are warring over funding for the Department of Homeland Security as this partial government shutdown becomes the longest DHS shutdown in history. Christina.
All right, joining us now is Kevin Whitelaw. He's Bloomberg's managing editor for America's Weekend. Kevin, thank you for joining us. All right, if you are a lawmaker on Capitol Hill, what do you want to get done for your constituents? And is the White House necessarily helping with that?
Well, in this case, it's sort of all over the map, right? I mean, the lawmakers have all been hearing from their constituents, and many have been experiencing it themselves, these long lines at airports. They know this is a real problem. They know this is a pinch point for the kinds of people that often give to political campaigns, the business folks that they deal with, et cetera. So they most of them do want to sort of find a way out of at least that part of the crisis. But you did see the two chambers pursue different ways of going about it, showing that the split here is really, really stubborn and deep. And, the Democrats are simply not ready to allow any kind of immigration funding to be approved in any way. Now, in this case, the ICE operations have actually already been funded through this Trump's one big beautiful bill. So it's not about the money, but it is about being seen voting for the kinds of policies that led to situations in Minneapolis and elsewhere. And so
Democrats found a way with the Senate, with enough Senate Republicans to say, let's just fund everything else in the department and we'll leave the immigration stuff aside. Right. On the more partisan House, the sort of Freedom Caucus and the sort of the far right lawmakers said, no, that's not what's going to happen, and so they forced a sort of a different way through that chamber on a very, very partisan vote that would have simply been a short stopgap measure. So basically, we're nowhere. Congress is away now.
that's not going to move. Trump went ahead and signed this executive action to pay workers. We're still trying to figure out exactly how it's going to work, where the money's coming from, how it's going to get delivered. Does that mean they're getting one paycheck or are they getting all their back pay? We've had some slightly conflicting information on that. So I think we're going to be watching in the next couple of days to see how quickly that happens and whether or not that is enough to change things, because these workers still aren't going to have paychecks going forward necessarily. For a while.
Kevin, lawmakers are going to get an earful, I assume, from constituents over the course of the recess on this matter, what's happening with TSA. And of course, when they get back to Washington, they're expecting to get this proposal from the Pentagon, a $200 billion supplemental. Let's take a listen to what the president had to say about the path forward here with the war in Iran last night.
Now we're just going after targets. And they have no anti-aircraft, so we're just floating over the top looking for whatever we want. And we're hitting it, and we have another 3,554 targets left, and that'll be done pretty quickly. And then at some point, we're going to have to determine what we do.
A lot of specificity there, Kevin. 3,554 targets. We're hearing from a lot of lawmakers, a chorus of lawmakers wanting more specifics about the path forward. In the minute we have left with you, how big an issue is this as that bill, that spending bill, that supplemental comes to the floor, to Congress?
Well, we still haven't seen the actual bill. We don't know what the final shape of it's going to be. So that's an approximate number. It's a very big number for what they're talking about and for the kind of operations, particularly for a war that supposedly is almost over. It's already been won, if we listen to what the president has also said, since we've seen both that this is almost over or that there's 3,000 targets left to hit. So I think everyone's going to be trying to figure out what exactly the plan is, what exactly the strategy is. But even if you get to that, how does Iran react? And is Iran ready to go along with what the U.S. is looking for? Because up to now, we really haven't seen much sign that there's any actual negotiation going on. So I do think that as lawmakers are going to be eventually dealing with that question, as they get the budget requests, as they get the supplemental, what does this mean? Is there a strategy? And what do we actually really need? What does the U.S. need to do if they are trying to figure out how both to go after Iran, but now also how to rebuild the stocks of missile defenses that have been severely depleted by the conflict?
Key questions there. Kevin Whitelaw, thank you very much.
Thanks, Kevin. All right, a little while ago, we spoke to Senators Todd Young, a Republican from Indiana, and Elissa Slotkin, a Democrat from Michigan. That was just hours before the Senate passed a DHS funding package, which, as we just mentioned, the House rejected. A new funding package, of course, is now stalled on the Hill.
We're focused so much on funding for the Department of Homeland Security and know that there's a standoff there between these two parties. Let me start with you first, Senator Young. Where are we in this process? How much closer are we to any kind of resolution to this partial shutdown that's stretched on longer than a month?
Well, I know I speak in a broadly bipartisan way. I know Senator Slotkin agrees with me. Where we are is exhausted with this issue. We want to come to terms in a bipartisan way. We want to fund TSA. We want our homeland to be more secure. And listen, there have been some principled disagreements about ICE and how they ought to operate and other important public policy issues that have been in play. But I think we're all getting much closer to a meeting of minds on these issues. That's my sense. Our leaders are now talking somewhat, sometimes through intermediaries. And I think there's a sense of urgency that I feel here in the halls of Congress to finally get this resolved for the American people.
Your sense as well, Senator Slotkin?
Yeah, I mean, I think, look, we're supposed to be going on 2 weeks of, home leave, and I don't think anyone feels that we should be leaving, at least I don't, until we figure this out, right? We also are the ones who travel through the airports twice a week and have to face the TSA officers who are keeping us safe while also not being paid. So I think it's coming to a head, as it should. And I think, look, personally, I think we're having a big cultural conversation on the role of ICE and law enforcement in our streets. But the missions of all the other parts of Homeland Security, as a former CIA officer, I worked alongside those offices my entire career. I would fund them today. So I think there's actually a lot of overlap. We just need people to kind of buckle down, sit down, shut out the news media, no offense, and just get it done so we can go on with our lives. And then I think there's a bigger question about, we're the only country I know in the world that just constantly lives in these government shutdowns and allows people who are protecting us to be kind of at the mercy of these political conversations. I would be personally in full support of just not having this happen 3 times in a calendar year for these folks. So I think there's bigger reforms that we need. But at this point, just get her done. We all know what we need to do, and just sit in a room until you get it done.
It does seem like deja vu all over again is happening again and again and again, much sooner than it used to. At the risk of causing a rift in this lovely bipartisan tableau we have going on, I do want to ask both of you some questions about what's going on in Iran. Senator Slotkin, I'll start with you. 4 weeks in, do you feel like the administration has a clear strategy in Iran?
Well, look, I mean, I served 3 tours in Iraq alongside the military as a CIA officer, and you know, I know it is harder to get out of a war than it is to get into a war. I'm on the Armed Services Committee, so they've been briefing us. You know, I think it was hard to understand what the clear objectives are, so it's hard to understand exactly how we're doing. I have no love lost for the Iranian government. I watch them and the Iranian-backed militias kill friends of mine in Iraq. But until and unless we can have ships move through the Strait of Hormuz, until and unless, you know, the average person in Michigan is actually not paying for this war through the pump, I think it's hard to say it's resolved. And I hope that we're figuring out quickly at the White House exactly how we're going to bring this to resolution. But right now, I think it's too soon to tell whether we can call ourselves winning, and certainly until the straits are open, we're not.
Senator Young, same question to you. And do you have any idea what those 2 Marine Expeditionary Units and the 82nd Airborne are planning to do once they arrive in the Middle East? Is that clear to you?
No, I don't have great clarity on that. That's an operational matter, and I do believe that Congress has an important oversight role to play on such questions. I think that's the prerogative of the Armed Services Committee and the Foreign Relations Committee, and I've indicated very publicly in the past that I think we needed to hold more hearings, where possible, more public hearings, before we get into major engagements. But that said, I know the President is determined to degrade any nuclear weapons development capabilities of the Islamic Republic of Iran. I know that he's determined to make sure that the Iranian proxies of this largest state sponsor of terror in the world are degraded as well. We're making some good progress on that. And then the missile capabilities of this terroristic regime are also being degraded. So on all those fronts, we've made some positive progress. I think so many of us, the American people, my Hoosier constituents and all across the country want us to bring this to as quick of a close as possible. If we can indicate that across those 3 measures that I laid out, we've made some real progress and come up with a negotiated diplomatic solution to open up the Strait of Hormuz on an ongoing basis, then I think the president can rightly declare a victory, and the American people can resume their economic activity and ways of life. And our men and women in uniform who are performing so nobly and heroically can be safe and secure and proud of their mission.
A question for each of you just about that $200 billion supplemental that's being floated by the Pentagon. Is it something you support? What would it take for you to support it? I'll start with you, Senator Slotkin.
Yeah, I mean, look, we've seen it floated. We haven't seen anything in black and white. And something I always commit to my constituents in Michigan is I read everything. I'm going to look at everything objectively. But I will say, you know, at the height of the wars in Iraq and Afghanistan, when we had hundreds of thousands of troops deployed, things weren't going well in places like Iraq. The biggest supplemental we ever approved through this body was $100 million, and the ask here is $200 million. So I'm going to open up the hood and look at anything that comes that is that size. And I'm skeptical that after getting an extra $150 billion this past summer, on top of a nearly $1 trillion Pentagon budget that they got just last year, I'm skeptical that I'm going to be like, you know, just rubber stamping anything like that. You know, and I think the American people are concerned about spending that kind of money. But I will always read everything. That's my obligation, and we haven't seen anything formally.
Senator Young, how about you?
Well, we need to be skeptical. That's our jobs, to scrutinize individual line items of spending requests rather than just giving the green light, especially when a check to the tune of $200 billion is requested. But I will say the armaments that we have been expending to carry out these operations have been incredibly expensive. And as we adapt to this new age of warfare and have to invest in other types of armaments while replenishing these older school armaments, that can become very expensive as we sort of make that transition. So I enter this exercise of looking through the requested supplemental package objectively, and I want to support carrying out that deterrence mission so we don't have to fight any more wars, which is the most expensive thing for the American people. I want to make sure we have everything possible needed to avoid any future conflict.
Senators, thank you so much. I understand you have a vote and you have to run, but I really appreciate you both taking the time, and good luck with the legislation.
Thanks so much.
Thank you. I mean, that was nice to have. I can't remember the last time two senators did something together.
Bipartisan unity.
Yeah, exactly.
Here on the show. Appreciate that. Senators Young and Slotkin joining us there to talk about the state of play, yes, with that DHS funding, but with the forthcoming request here for $200 billion in supplemental funding for the war in Iran. As we continue to chart what's been happening overnight, yesterday, of course, those strikes that we saw on Iran electrical infrastructure. Looking here at images, live pictures of central Israel, where emergency crews are responding to a suspected Iranian missile attack. We don't yet know of any injuries or what was targeted in this attack. When we come back, we're going to discuss the war, where it stands, where it's headed with Brigadier General Mark Kimmitt. He's going to join us next right here on Bloomberg This Week, and of course on Bloomberg Television, Bloomberg Radio at Bloomberg.com, and on the Bloomberg Business app. Much more to come.
Thank you for joining us live on Bloomberg This Weekend. I'm Lisa Mateo. Let's get you up to date on the top stories. And Secretary of State Marco Rubio, he says the weapons for Ukraine have not yet been diverted to the Middle East.
Well, it hasn't happened yet. Nothing yet has been diverted, but it could. I mean, frankly, it's not diverted. These are not diverted weapons. These are our weapons. These are sales. These are military sales through Pearl, paid for by NATO. And so the question at some point is, if we have a need, let me be clear. If the United States has a military need, whether it is to replenish our stocks or to fulfill some mission in the national interest of the United States, we're always going to come first.
Now, Rubio, he was speaking outside of a G7 gathering that was in France yesterday. He also said that the U.S. war in Iran will take weeks, not months. Now, meanwhile, President Trump, he is promising some relief for farmers and saying that he saved farms by ending estate tax.
Very importantly, we saved 2 million American farms from extinction by virtually ending the unfair estate tax. We've ended the estate tax, or as they call it, the death tax, and you can now keep your family farms in the family.
And speaking outside the White House yesterday, Trump said loan guarantees would cover farmers as well as food suppliers. Well, to tech now, where sources say Meta plans to debut 2 new Ray-Ban smart glass models next week. That's intended for prescription wearers. Now, just to be clear, the company glasses, it did have that long-supported prescription lenses, but this is going to be the first time that Meta is introducing those Ray-Bans designed specifically for that group, for prescription wearers. David and Christina.
Don't come on this show wearing those, Christina.
Please don't. Although I swear those are the ones I was wearing earlier were not Meta glasses,
not Meta,
but they really do
kind of
look like
that.
They look all right. All right. Well, my mother hates those glasses anyway. More
I'm a
reason
little spooked by them.
not to wear them. I don't.
When am I being recorded? I don't know.
I don't like it.
Right now, I am. We're on
Well,
television.
I was going to say, what's in these frames?
No, these are bespoke.
Oh, good Lord. All right, Lisa, thank you so much. I'm going to move on quickly and try not to roll my eyes so hard I fall off my chair. David?
Yes. Today marks 4 weeks since the start of the U.S. and Israel's war with Iran. Despite indications the administration is not preparing for a ground invasion, the Pentagon is surging troops and ships to the Middle East.
All right, joining us now is retired Brigadier General Mark Kimmitt. He also served as the former Assistant Secretary of State for Political Military Affairs under George W. Bush. General, I do want to ask you, we have some sound from Marco Rubio about putting ground troops into this conflict. I want you to listen to that really quickly.
We're going to destroy their factories that make missiles and rockets and drones. We're going to destroy their Navy. We're going to destroy their Air Force. And we are going to significantly destroy their missile launchers so they can never hide behind these things to get a nuclear weapon. We are achieving all those objectives. We are ahead of schedule on most of them. And we can achieve them without any ground troops.
All right, without any ground troops, do you think it's clear that the U.S. can achieve those goals? What are those goals, and can they do it without ground forces?
Well, first of all, to answer your question, I think they can do most, if not all of that, without ground forces. If they're talking about hard destruction of missile sites, of discovered nuclear sites, and their Navy. If, on the other hand, they want to conduct short-term operations to, say, go against their speedboats that have been so effective in the past, and we saw in Yemen, with the sinking of the USS Cole by the speedboats, that may take troops on the ground for a short period of time. And of course, the Kharg Island question begs the question if we're going to have to put ground troops there.
That begs the question, how are you thinking about that at this point in time? So it's something the administration has floated. The president's been a bit coy about whether or not it's something that he might pursue. At this point, as we approach the 5-week mark here in this conflict, does it make strategic sense for you, for the U.S. to get involved in taking Kharg Island?
Well, listen, I think it may make sense to take Kharg Island if we can't get through the Strait of Hormuz, or if Iran sets up the toll booth, as they say they're going to do. I just don't think it necessarily needs to be done with ground troops. In fact, I think ground troops is probably the worst option of all, because obviously we'd have troops at risk. We'd have Iran firing at those troops, probably destroying some of the infrastructure. I think we've got to ask, what is the purpose of taking Kharg Island? And that is to put the oil terminals at risk. Well, the fact is we could very well do that with a cyber attack on the electricity that pumps that oil into the ships. We could go against some of the pipes as well. I would say the best way to do this is by a short-term, quickly reversible mission that allows us to control the pumping going into those tankers rather than put Americans on the ground.
Something you said there might be key, and that's quickly reversible, because one of the things that military as well, but diplomatic folks are really concerned about is the fact that if the U.S. destroys Iran's infrastructure and economy, you are less likely to get a functional regime that can support the goals of a potentially democratic Iranian people if they can't support their own economy. If you destroy their infrastructure, their oil infrastructure, you're going to have a failed state there. So you think that something like a computer virus or like a cyber attack would be better because that is easily reversible? That's something you can claw back when you need to?
Yeah, you've got it. I think we have the ability to disrupt for periods of time the flow of oil into those tankers. Like you said, I want it to be reversible so that at the time we've achieved our military objectives and our strategic objectives, we can turn that back on for the good of the Iranian people primarily.
I want to ask you about the relationship between the U.S. and Israel. We've talked about this a bit on the show over the course of the morning. You had the president saying he intended to pause prospective strikes on energy infrastructure, power infrastructure in Iran. And then not even 24 hours after that, we saw Israel going after some of those sites. What does that tell you about the level of coordination here? And I guess more broadly speaking, about the way these two countries, these two allies, see the war going directionally from here on out?
Look, I think we've got to understand that countries act in their own national interests, even when they're working together. For us, Iran is not a daily existential threat. For Israel, it is a daily existential threat, which will be compounded 1,000 times if Iran gets a nuclear weapon. So it does not surprise me that even though the coordination is as good as it's ever been, far better than when I was the lead planner at CENTCOM, I can understand why there's a divergence in national interests. And at the end of the day, you've got to take care of your national interests rather than your coalition interests.
One of those diverging interests really seems to be the new front that Israel has opened up in Lebanon. And today you have an Israeli opposition leader warning that the Israeli military is stretched to the limits and beyond. Of course, this is coming after those attacks and the conflict in Gaza. This is, they're taking incoming from Iran and now going after the second front in Lebanon. Do you think that Israel can sustain that effort without the United States? And if the United States pulls out, will that essentially end this operation? Or do you think Israel will try to continue on its own?
Well, two things. What is happening in Lebanon is separate from what's going on in Iran. Lebanon is a unilateral Israeli operation that is providing ground forces. They are stretched. Israel depends to a great extent on the reserve forces that are only brought on for certain periods of time. So if Israel is stretched, and it could very well be that it is, that's on the land forces. If we pull out and Israel wants to continue the airstrikes into Iran, I don't think we'd pull out completely. I think it would be more like a Ukraine situation where if we pulled out, we'd still be providing intelligence, still be providing support. We just wouldn't have American aircraft in the air.
I'd love for you to put your planner hat on again. As you mentioned, you were the lead planner at CENTCOM a while back. When you hear the president talking as he did last night about there being 3,554 targets left in Iran, or that we're just kind of floating over the country looking for whatever we want and we're hitting it. How do you react to that, given the kind of work, the granular work that you supervised when you were at CENTCOM? How do you feel, how comfortable are you with the level of planning that has been done in advance of this military operation, indeed is going on right now?
Yeah, that's a very good question. In a bit of self-promotion, I just wrote an article on this 2 days ago for the National Interest, talking about the Vietnam body count fallacy. I think it's important to understand that we can knock out any target we want, for the most part, inside of Iran, but blowing up stuff does not necessarily equate to strategic victory. The Iranians are not stupid. They have taken a resistance defense, not an active defense. They're saying, we're going to wait out these bombs. We can handle them. We're going to depend not on our military capability, but on the impatience of the American people. So if we can hang in there, just like they did in Afghanistan, just like they did in Vietnam, just as the Israelis have done in Lebanon time after time, they'll eventually tire of this, they'll pull out, and even though we've had a significant amount of destruction, well, that's for the resistance, and we win, they lose. They believe they win by not losing.
Are they right?
I think the fact that we are already talking about political off-ramps, military off-ramps, words like Rubio's, Secretary Rubio, that says it's a matter of weeks. If I was an Iranian in the IRGC planning department, I'd say, let's just put on our helmets and wait till this is going to end. The Americans say they're going to be done in 2 weeks. War will be over and we can get back to our nuclear program.
I also want to ask you, as somebody who has extensive military experience at CENTCOM and somebody who worked at the State Department, that Poly Military Affairs Bureau, there's some very good folks in there that I've worked with as a reporter over the years. Are you at all concerned about the lack of subject matter experts being brought into these strategy sessions, being brought into these negotiations? You have a very small circle of people. Keep in mind, Marco Rubio is not only Secretary of State, he's also a National Security Council Director. I've talked to some folks at State who are largely not being consulted when it comes to these negotiations. You have Steve Witkoff, Jared Kushner leading the way on multiple fronts. Would you like to see the administration rely more on some of these folks who have spent their lives studying this, or do you think they've got it handled?
Well, I also was head of the Middle East Bureau at Department of Defense as well. And I share the concerns that people have expressed by the fact that they're not bringing in the experts. But as long as I see people like Dan Kane as the chairman, I think the military in uniform is going to be okay, because he has really impressed me throughout this military campaign, not only in terms of his planning, but in terms of his communication with the American people. I do agree with you that there may not be as much advice taken within the State Department, within the National Security Council, and that's pretty much being run by the special envoys. So yes, there is a concern, but I'd also suggest that watching decades of Middle East negotiations done by the self-appointed experts, and they have gotten nowhere, sometimes you need people that come in and break the glass. Nonetheless, I have been surprised at a couple of things that are going on with regards to the Iran war. But I think by and large, the experts could have added marginally. But this is not like the crowd that says if they had listened to us, we wouldn't have gone into Iraq. That's just not the case here.
Retired General Mark Kimmitt, thank you very much for your time on this Saturday. I really appreciate your perspective here as we mark the start of the fifth week of this war, Christina. And your point is a very good one. I've heard that from so many diplomats, that it's not necessarily the fact that it's Steve Witkoff and not a career diplomat leading those negotiations, but it's what is the apparatus surrounding him? How much in the way of subject matter expertise is he able to draw from when he has these talks? And
there is a good counter argument to be made, as you heard from the general there, that sometimes those contemplative, smart people can also be paralytic when it comes to bureaucracy, when it comes to contemplation, and they don't act. So sometimes it is good to get someone in there to shake it up and move it forward. But there are a lot of people who would like to help and who would like to advise, no matter what the objectives of the White House are, no matter what party is in place, and they feel like they're just not being used as they could be.
That impulse to move fast and break things, sometimes it works and sometimes it doesn't, in the context of diplomacy.
All right, coming up, tech stocks taking a beating this week. Will they get a boost from SpaceX? Details on what could be the biggest IPO ever. This is Bloomberg This Weekend. Stay tuned.
Thank you for joining us live on Bloomberg This Weekend. I'm Lisa Mateo. Let's get you up to date with some of the top stories. And Tiger Woods, he is released on bail. That's after being arrested on suspicion of DUI. Authorities say Woods' Land Rover had clipped a truck, rolled onto its side yesterday afternoon in Jupiter Island, Florida. A breath test did show no alcohol in his system. Investigators believe his impairment, well, it was due to medication or drugs. Woods was previously involved in a car crash in 2021 that left him with serious injuries. To March Madness, where Duke has advanced, beating St. John's 80-75. The Johnnies, though they gave it a good run, it was close for a bit. Duke now heads to the Elite Eight along with UConn, Michigan, and Tennessee. Today, Iowa takes on Illinois and Purdue challenges Arizona. And you know who's going to be watching, guys? It's the group of business and finance executives taking part in Bloomberg's annual Brackets for a Cause. So over on BRKT Go, they each picked the charity of their choice. They pledged about $20,000, which means there's more than $1.2 million in play. So we're taking a look live at the leaderboard. We have Jeff Smith. He's at number 1. He is Starboard Value Managing Member, CEO, CIO. But a few other names to kind of point out there. John Hess also in there. He's John Hess, the CEO of Hess. And David Solomon. He's also up there as well. Goldman Sachs Chairman, CEO. So they're doing pretty good. We'll see who comes out on top at the end when this is all over.
The winner, a sizable charitable donation.
They each picked their own charity.
Okay.
So it was good. So that portion of it will go to the charity of their choice. So it's a big pot. So if they each pledge $20,000, that's a lot of money.
Sizable amount. My bracket very busted. I don't know
I
about
did not
yours.
do
Already?
I did not.
Already?
No, I didn't do
Oh my God. First weekend it was busted. It's been a
Okay, but this is what I mean. Even you people who know what you're talking about,
No.
your brackets, I feel like you could just throw things,
That's
throw
true.
things in the grid,
Should've.
your odds
Just
are
do it
pretty much the same.
impulsively.
Honestly,
Yeah.
Best way to do it.
All right.
All right, thanks, Lisa. The war in Iran, as we've been talking about all morning and really all week, is rattling the markets. The S&P 500 has fallen more than 7% in the last 5 weeks, and the Nasdaq is in correction territory. But news that SpaceX is targeting a potential blockbuster of an IPO, $75 billion, potentially the largest one ever, could inject a little bit of enthusiasm into the market.
Joining us now to break all of this down is Bailey Lipschultz, senior reporter here at Bloomberg News. Bailey, great to have you with us. We want to talk about this IPO. We're waiting for SpaceX to file this prospectus, which could happen any day now. Before we get there, though, I want to get your perspective on what we saw over the course of the last week. This has been a market that has been, I don't want to say complacent as this war has unfolded, but it does seem like there were doubts sown among investors here at the end of the week, and it was a nasty Friday, to say the least.
No, it was a nasty Friday. And David, you know this as well as anyone. If you are an investor, one thing you hate is uncertainty. And the other thing is being long stocks or risk assets over a weekend where pretty much it's anyone's guess what the next 36 hours will look like. And so when you really look at the price action that we saw on Friday in particular, it did seem like people either were adding up on bearish hedges or really dumping anything that was particularly risky, just given we don't know what the weekend will bring. And when you lay that across the entire month that was March, we've had a lot of volatility. To your point, you talk to bullish investors. Well, hey, we're only down 5, 6, 7%, depending on the index that you look at. That's not that bad, all things considered. And every potential headline that a resolution is on the horizon typically brings at least a knee-jerk reaction. But when I talk to folks on Wall Street, there still is this resounding hope that the problems will be addressed and the war will be ended sooner than later, and then business can get back to usual. There aren't many people thinking about what happens if this drags on for another 4 or 5 weeks.
So with all that in the backdrop, why do this now? Why does SpaceX want to do this now? And is this a fait accompli? Are they definitely doing it soon, or might they wait given all this volatility?
So the thing with IPOs are they can be long, drawn-out processes. With SpaceX, every detail is closely watched. So what we're waiting for is a confidential filing, which would formally kick off the potential IPO path. The big thing to keep in mind is that SpaceX has kind of been vocal, at least through various media reports, that they want to go public in June. And if you think back 2.5 months ago, the market backdrop was quite different. So when you look at the time frame for SpaceX to go public, we could be in a very different market by the time it actually gets kind of on the launch pad and potentially goes public versus where we are now, where submitting this document to the SEC just makes it easier to market the deal more formally to investors, as opposed to setting any type of shot clock, if you will.
Wait, I have logistics questions for you guys who've covered IPOs before, which I have not on this level. Do you have to constantly, is it like a DOJ filing? Do you have to constantly refresh the page waiting for that to pop up? Or do you know that they've posted it and you can go get it?
So with the Jobs Act, they opened up confidential filing. So technically they could submit and no one knows. So this could be something that they announce via press release. This could be something that us and competitors find from our sourcing and report out. Or we were joking with a few bankers. In theory, we are understanding this is not the case. In theory, they could have submitted this a month ago and were able to keep it tight-lipped and no one actually knows. Like, this is the one aspect of that filing. And the big thing is you file the submission, you submit the filing confidentially, then you wait a month to go back and forth with the SEC from there. And that's kind of why this March timeframe was so critical for Elon to potentially meet his goal of going public by his birthday, which is the end of June.
Wow. I got to give you props for using the IPO on the launch pad pun there, which I'm sure was deliberate, Bailey. I want to ask you about what this company is kind of picking up off of that. I think there are a lot of people who think of SpaceX as a company that makes and shoots off rockets into space. It has grown to such more than that over the last many years. This is a company that now owns XAI, which is Elon Musk's AI company, which is hemorrhaging money as it tries to build up and build new data centers. Starlink, of course, has been bringing money in. It owns that too. And then what was formerly known as Twitter, X, is now part of XAI, so part of this whole conglomerate as well. How does that complicate the way that investors are looking at this company as an investment? The fact that it really is this very multifaceted conglomerate.
To your point, when you think back to February before the merger of parent company XAI, which owns X, and SpaceX, SpaceX was arguably one of the cleanest stories in the private market. It was essentially a space monopoly that owns launch, getting rockets and satellites into space. And to your point, owning Starlink, which is the dominant player in potentially getting, or actually actively getting direct to consumer, direct to cell phone and other devices, internet connection. Now with this merger, when I talk to investors, the pitch still is heavily predicated on the kind of old school SpaceX company, with XAI being a part of that. The one thing to keep in mind is if you talk to many people, and if you polled, I would say, the smartest people on Wall Street and asked, well, what is Tesla? Is it a car company? Is it a robot company? Is it something that's going to be partnering with SpaceX for Terafab? It's just the entire Elon ecosystem, that Elon premium, that these companies are very complex, and there are a lot of areas to look at that can justify higher valuations.
I'm glad you bring up Tesla, and I think about the history of that company and how Elon Musk really valued the true believers among those investors who stood with him even as Tesla wasn't able to make as many cars as it said it would, as deadlines got pushed. And Elon Musk has a real affection for the retail investor. I'm curious how SpaceX is going to benefit or serve those investors going forward. Do we have any sense of sort of how they will be able to take advantage of this IPO when in fact it happens?
So we've put out the reporting that they could allocate about 30 to 35% of the IPO for retail investors. One thing to keep in mind, if the company does raise its targeted $75 billion, it's about $22.5 billion for retail, which would be the third largest IPO in the history of IPOs. So that's an insane amount of money to just comprehend that could be allocated to retail. And to your point, the boardroom and these bankers are discussing the best way to allocate shares to the true believers, people who have held Tesla for a long time. Maybe people who own Tesla cars will be able to get better access at the IPO. At the end of the day, when we talk to bankers, finding $75 billion of demand, there's enough capital out there, but being able to execute the IPO in a way that delivers for both the company and investors is going to be closely watched.
Bailey, we've got about 30 seconds left, but how much of this is trying to get ahead of Anthropic, and what does this mean for OpenAI, and Anthropic?
Yeah, it's a bit of a race, and SpaceX clearly has set the best timeline or the quickest timeline to circle that June target. We reported that Anthropic could go as soon as October, and OpenAI, from our understanding, is kind of neck and neck potentially with trying to line up those prospects to go public. So when we think about 2026 as a whole, we could see all three of these companies, or if the volatility continues, we could see one or two drag on into 2027.
All right, Bailey Lipschultz, Bloomberg News senior reporter. Thank you for breaking that all down, and you'll have to WhatsApp me when that IPO filing happens. Yeah, I'm very curious.
I was talking to our colleague Ed Ludlow about this, who covers space, the business of space, and this is such an interesting moment for that as well. This is a really hot part of technology generally, so this will be a real litmus and sort of investor enthusiasm for space-related companies going
and for the man
here.
in charge of the company.
There you go, for Elon Musk as well. We'll see how much of the company he ends up owning as a result of this IPO. All right, when we come back, we're talking about my busted bracket. Another dose of humility here as Christina and I play the game Pointed. Lisa Mateo is going to run that in just a moment here on Bloomberg This Weekend. That's coming up. Well, it's time for my favorite part of the show. That is Pointed, the news quiz for risk takers, right here on Bloomberg This Weekend.
We've narrowed down the larger quiz that you can play online to 3 categories, and Lisa is going to test our knowledge. And I'm sorry, who is currently leading?
You are, in fact, leading by a 1-point margin. It is still anyone's game.
I'm very nervous about this, though. I did overhear them saying how hard the quiz was this week. So this could be your week, David Gura.
This is going to be a good one, guys. Okay, so for those of you at home who are like, what are you talking about? Pointed? Okay, so here's exactly how it works. In front of David and Christina, they each have 30 chips, okay? So they've split it up, and they have 3 categories, and they're going to place their bets depending on how they feel, how confident they feel about each category.
This is for our radio audience. No, it's for our radio audience.
Just
Here we go.
Merely the sound effect.
She does. Okay, so we've got everyone covered.
You're not intimidating me.
Are you ready for the categories?
I'm sorry, Lisa, yes.
Yes, please. Ready, David. Okay, the first category is ammunition.
Ammunition.
The second category is trade, and the third category is hoarding.
Hoarding.
Okay.
Hoarding.
So it's quite a category. So place your bets depending on how confident you feel. Where are you going as far as ammunition? What do you think?
I'm going to go none on ammunition.
Okay.
I'm going to go double on
20 on
trade. And then hoarding, I have no expertise, but I'm interested.
10.
Okay. I'm going to split across the board because I don't feel overly confident in any of these categories. So I'm doing 10, 10, and 10.
Okay.
Excellent. All right, you ready for your first question?
That was a very evil look.
Ammunition.
Right.
Ooh, I'm excited for this.
How hard do you think this is? We get into it. Is this the hardest
I only
week yet?
got one of them, so.
Great.
Sorry.
All right.
Okay, here we go. Ammunition. Arms manufacturer ZVS was once a Cold War casualty, but is being revitalized in which European nation?
Oh, okay.
Which European nation is it starting to get back into it and see a surge? It's actually the world's biggest car producer per capita, this nation.
I just got that wrong then. Hold on. Thank you for that. That was very good. Okay. All right. Then I'm going to just change that.
Okay.
Yeah.
I gave you a little help.
All right, now I have no idea, but
yeah.
Didn't help you? Okay.
Car producer.
You ready?
Go ahead.
3, 2, 1. Germany.
No.
They make a lot of cars.
Slovakia is correct, Christina.
They make cars in Slovakia?
Okay. That's what threw me.
How'd you know that?
I had no... Because I read something about the arms manufacturer, but I had cars?
Cars, the world's biggest car producer per capita. Slovakia.
Per capita.
Yes.
Oh, for God's
sake. See,
sake.
I confused you there, David.
Thank God I didn't put any chips on that one.
But what is a Slovakian car? I mean, it's not a Yugo. They don't make those anymore.
But actually, they have been ramping up their ammunition output. Some 30,000 before NATO started ramping up the Ukraine-Russia war full invasion in 2022. So you bet 10.
It's one of those places they're getting those big shells from.
Correct. Yeah. You bet 10, so you keep your 10. David,
right,
you got nothing. You bet nothing. You bet nothing.
I
Okay.
feel like I made a
You don't even lose
move
anything.
on that part.
All right, I'm going to get you in trade. Trade.
So that got me nothing. All right,
here we go.
On.
Play along at home. Due to national security concerns, the FCC is banning imports of foreign-produced models of which product?
Do you know this one because my brother's a nerd?
She was also talking a lot about this in the office.
So you
Though
both
I didn't read up on this, I just know from Christina's talking about it.
See, sometimes I'm helpful.
Sometimes he listens, Christina.
Only occasionally.
Intermittently.
Let's go. Okay, flip it. What do you got?
All right. Routers.
Wireless routers. Correct. You both get it. You both get it.
Thanks,
yes,
Joey
yes.
Ruffini.
Cyber attacks. There've been a lot of talk about them for cyber attacks.
Yes.
All right. So you each have. Okay. So
do you want to add
Christina
anything to this
20.
before we move on? I mean, you've
You have
talked about it a
20.
lot. No.
No, I mean, my brother's concern is there are really no domestically manufactured wireless routers at the moment of that next generation. They're all made overseas, so it is going to be a problem. Like, if we can't upgrade them, we can't get them from anywhere. But that's the issue.
Well, there is one company, Netgear. They might investors might think because they moved them much of their supply chain outside of China. So that might be one company. Here we go.
It's the more you know.
And Shooting Star. Okay, here we go.
All right.
Moving on to hoarding. Okay. Which household staple hoarded during the 1973 oil shock did Japan just warn shoppers not to buy in bulk?
Is it the same
It's
thing
a
we
household
hoarded?
staple. I wonder.
I don't know.
It's a good thought. It's a good thought.
This music is very
contemplative.
I know.
Yeah.
It's like soothing. It's very soothing.
What
As
are you
sit there-
writing?
Wait,
Are you
you're
writing
writing
an
too
essay
much.
over
You're
there?
writing
Ready?
too much.
Okay.
Okay.
I wrote.
Flip it. What did you write?
Toilet paper, aka bathroom tissue.
I also just
Toilet
wrote
paper.
toilet
You
paper.
both got it right.
Oh,
Yay.
which
Good
leads
job.
to, I think, a tie.
Oh, we
that's
tied.
right.
So you know
Yes.
what that means if we're
There's
tied.
got to be a bonus question.
There's a bonus
no, I was so
question.
close. Okay.
You know, we have to take it to the bonus. Okay. The bonus is gaming.
Gaming.
Okay.
Oh, this is not looking good.
Okay. No. I think you got this, Christine.
Like board games.
Fortnite's parent company cutting 1,000 jobs due to spending concerns. What is the name of the company? So what is the name of Fortnite's parent company?
I do know this.
It's going to be a real tie.
What if you both get it right? Then we have a tie again. Then would you have another breaker?
We'll just leave.
No.
We'll just leave
Leave
and
it there and
detente.
encourage
All right.
folks to go
Okay,
to
flip it. What do you got?
Epic.
Epic. Yes, Epic Games. The
All
CEO
right.
said they're spending a lot of money, more than we're making.
This is
That's
a
what they
North
said.
Carolina-based
We
company.
end in a tie today.
All right, that wasn't as bad as I
Well,
thought.
that's okay.
You guys did well.
Thank you so much.
Shake and be
Very
friends.
good.
Nice
Very
job,
good.
Lisa. Thank you to our production team as well. That's always fun.
And you can find the rest of the game?
Yes. You too can do it.
Sorry.
Bloomberg.com/pointed. Play at home. Hey, they give you some options. You have
It's multiple choice at
So it's a
home.
little
You
bit
don't have
easier
to.
for
You don't have to write them on a whiteboard.
Always play at home, and you'll have just as much fun as we do
Yes,
here.
you don't get my commentary, but maybe that's for the best.
I think we all would appreciate the game and a little bit of silence.
Slightly less
A
commentary.
little bit of silence. No, it was great.
On this Saturday morning. Well, thank you very much for joining us on Bloomberg this weekend. Tomorrow we'll speak live with Emily Gregory, fresh off her upset victory in Florida's state house race, flipping the Republican district that includes the president's Mar-a-Lago resort. I hope you'll join us starting at 7 o'clock Wall Street time, right here on Bloomberg Television, Bloomberg Radio, and at Bloomberg.com. I'm David Gura.
I'm Christina Ruffini, along with Lisa Mateo. For our listeners on Bloomberg Radio, Masters in Business is up next. And for our TV audience, Wall Street Week with David Weston starts right now. We'll see you tomorrow, 7 a.m.